The relentless Texas sun beat down on Mason Garrett's back as he tracked footprints across the parched earth. Sweat trickled between his shoulder blades, dampening his already salt-crusted shirt. His eyes narrowed against the glare never left the trail, hoofprints scattered campfire remnants, and occasionally a discarded cigarette butt. Small mistakes that would lead him to his quarry. 7 days he'd been following the horse thief across this unforgiving terrain. 7 days of dust heat and the growing pain in his left leg, an unwelcome souvenir from Gettysburg. The wound had reopened 2 nights ago, and each step now sent a fresh stab of agony up his thigh. Mason paused at the crest of a small rise, squinting at the horizon. A hazy collection of buildings shimmered in the distance, Perdition's Crossing, the last outpost before the Mexican border. If the thief reached Mexico, he'd be beyond Mason's reach. Beyond the reach of the law, too, not that Mason cared much about the law. $500 in bounty money was all that mattered. He urged his horse forward, grinding his teeth against the pain. Each jolt of the saddle was a fresh torment, but Mason had endured worse. Much worse. The memory came unbidden, flames leaping into the night sky, the acrid smell of burning wood, his desperate shouts drowned by the roar of the inferno. He pushed it away. 7 years and still the fire haunted him. By the time Mason rode into Perdition's Crossing, his leg was throbbing mercilessly. The main street was nearly deserted in the afternoon heat, just a few souls scurrying between patches of shade. A mangy dog watched him pass, too listless to bark. He dismounted outside the sheriff's office, his leg nearly buckling as it took his weight. Mason steadied himself against the hitching post, cursing under his breath. The throbbing had graduated to a white-hot burning. Sheriff Davis glanced up from his desk as Mason entered, recognition dawning on his weathered face. "Garrett," he said flatly. "Heard you were back to hunting bounties." Mason nodded once. "Tracking a horse thief, Vicente Ortega. Headed this way." The sheriff's expression soured. He passed through yesterday, sold the horses to the Williamson Ranch, and kept riding south. He studied Mason's face. "You look like hell, Garrett." Legs acting up. Mason shifted his weight, trying to hide his wince. "You need Doc Hernandez." The sheriff jerked his thumb toward the door. "Last building on the left past the saloon. Best sawbones this side of the Rio Grande, even if he is Mexican." Mason nodded his thanks and limped back into the scorching afternoon. Each step was agony now, but he forced himself forward. The doctor's office was a small adobe building with a hand-painted sign in both English and Spanish. The interior was mercifully cool and smelled of herbs and alcohol. Dr. Hernandez was a slight man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering. He motioned for Mason to sit on the examination table, then cut away the blood-crusted fabric of his trousers. "Ah," the doctor murmured, probing the inflamed flesh around the old wound. "Cavalry." "Infantry," Mason corrected, his jaw tight. 7 years ago." The doctor nodded, reaching for a bottle of clear liquid. "This will burn." Mason didn't flinch as the alcohol seared his open wound. He'd felt worse pain, the kind that didn't leave visible scars. "The tissue is infected," Hernandez said, wrapping a clean bandage around Mason's thigh. "You need rest. 1 week minimum." "Can't," Mason replied. "I'm tracking someone." "Then you will lose your leg." The doctor's voice was matter of fact. "Or your life." Mason stared at the wall jaw, working. $500 was a small fortune, but not worth his leg, not worth his life. 1 week, he conceded finally. The doctor handed him a small paper packet. "For the pain, take with water morning and night." His dark eyes studied Mason's face. "You are a hunter of men." "No," Mason didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. "Be careful in this town, senor," Hernandez warned quietly. "There are men here who hunt other things." Mason paid the doctor and limped back onto the street. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows between the buildings. His quarry was escaping his bounty along with it. The frustration knotted in his gut alongside the pain. He found a room at the town's only hotel, a drafty 2-story building with paper-thin walls. Then, with nothing else to do and a restlessness he couldn't shake, Mason made his way to the saloon. The Red Stallion was like 100 other frontier saloons Mason had frequented, a long, scarred bar, scattered tables, and the reek of cheap whiskey and stale sweat. A tired-looking woman plunked out a tuneless melody on an out-of-tune piano. 3 men played cards in the corner, and a 4th slumped at the bar, already deep in his cups despite the early hour. Mason ordered whiskey and took it to an empty table with his back to the wall. The burn of the alcohol did little to dull the throbbing in his leg or the irritation of being stuck in this dusty outpost while his bounty slipped away. 2 men entered the saloon, their voices carrying across the room. Mason didn't look up, but his ears caught snippets of their conversation. "Biggest shipment yet. Auction tomorrow at the old Butler place." Mexican women mostly, but some Apache too. Mason's hand stilled the glass halfway to his lips. Slave trading. Officially outlawed, but thriving in border towns like this one. He'd seen it before, human beings sold like cattle families, torn apart for profit. It wasn't his business. It wasn't his fight. He was a bounty hunter, not a lawman, not anymore. But something cold settled in his stomach as the men continued their casual conversation about tomorrow's merchandise. He drained his whiskey and ordered another, telling himself to stay out of it. He had his own problems, his own ghosts. But as the night wore on and the whiskey flowed, the conversation at the bar continued growing louder as the men became more intoxicated. Details of the slave market filled in location time expected buyers. Mason's old instincts, honed during his years as a Pinkerton detective, filed away the information without conscious thought. It wasn't his fight. But sleep eluded him that night, his dreams filled with broken chains and faces he couldn't save. Morning brought no relief. His leg throbbed worse than ever, and his head pounded from the whiskey. Mason took one of the doctor's powders with a grimace, washing it down with stale water from the pitcher by his bed. Against his better judgment, he found himself riding out to the old Butler place later that morning. He told himself he was just gathering information, a habit from his Pinkerton days. He wasn't getting involved. He couldn't afford to get involved. The Butler place was a ramshackle ranch about 3 miles outside town. Once a working cattle operation, it had fallen into disrepair after the war. Now it served darker purposes. Mason approached cautiously, staying among the scrubby trees that bordered the property. The scene that greeted him turned his stomach. In the dusty yard, wooden pens had been erected, the kind used for livestock auctions. But these pens didn't hold cattle. Women huddled in the enclosures, some sitting, others standing with vacant expressions. Most appeared to be Mexican, though Mason spotted a few who might be Apache or Navajo. Guards with rifles patrolled between the pens, keeping watch with bored expressions. Mason's jaw tightened as he surveyed the scene. This wasn't just illegal, it was an abomination. But what could one man do against armed guards in an operation that clearly had the local law in its pocket? He was about to turn away when a small hand grabbed his coat sleeve. Mason spun, reaching for his revolver, but froze when he saw the source. A little girl no more than 5 or 6 stared up at him with wide, terrified eyes. Her dress was torn and dirty, her feet bare and dusty. Dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face that was too thin, too old for her years. "Please," she whispered in halting English. "You know, take me. Only save my mama." Mason glanced around quickly, making sure they hadn't been spotted. "Where did you come from?" he asked in a low voice. The child pointed toward the pens. "Mama's sick, very sick. They say no one buy her now." Against his better judgment, Mason followed the girl's gaze. In the furthest pen, a woman slumped against a post, her wrists bound with coarse rope. Even from this distance, Mason could see she was in a bad way, her skin ashen, her body limp. "What's your name?" he asked the child. "Elena," she replied, still clutching his coat. "Please help Mama." Mason should walk away. This wasn't his fight. He was a bounty hunter, not a savior. Getting involved meant trouble, the kind that got men killed. But the child's eyes held him, pleading without words. "Stay here," he told her. "Don't move." Mason straightened his coat and strode toward the auction site with the confidence of a buyer. A large man with a drooping mustache intercepted him. "Auction don't start till noon," the man said, eyeing Mason suspiciously. "I heard there was a sick one," Mason replied, his voice casual. "Thought I might get a discount if I take her off your hands early." The man's expression shifted to one of calculated greed. "Might be arranged. Martinez handles the sales." He led Mason to a squat, well-dressed Mexican man who sat at a table counting money. Martinez looked up, assessing Mason with cold eyes. "This gentleman's interested in the sick merchandise," the first man explained. Martinez frowned. "The woman is damaged goods. Fever. Might not survive." "I'll take my chances," Mason said. "How much?" "200. For a woman who might die tomorrow." "50. Martinez's eyes narrowed. 150. And that's robbery already. 75, Mason countered. "Final offer." After a tense moment, Martinez nodded. 75, but all sales final. No refunds if she dies. As money changed hands, Mason felt a surge of self-loathing. He was participating in something vile, even if his intentions were different. "There's a child, too," Mason said, keeping his voice neutral. "Hers, I assume." Martinez waved dismissively. "Take her, no charge. She's too small for real work anyway." Mason followed the first man to the pen where the woman lay. Up close, her condition was even worse than he thought. Her face was gaunt, her breathing shallow. Bruises mottled her arms and dried blood crusted around a split lip. As the guard untied her wrists, her head lolled to one side, exposing her neck. Something glinted in the harsh sunlight, a broken silver chain with half a pendant hanging from it. Mason's breath caught. The pendant was distinctive, half of a circular medallion with an unusual pattern etched into the silver. He knew that pendant. He'd commissioned it himself 7 years ago as a wedding gift for Rebecca. It was impossible. Rebecca had died in the fire. Their infant daughter, too. He'd seen the charred remains of their home, had been told nothing could have survived that inferno. Yet here was half of her necklace around the throat of a strange woman. In a daze, Mason helped load the unconscious woman onto his horse. The child Elena appeared from the shadows, rushing to her mother's side with a cry of distress. "She'll be all right," Mason said automatically, though he had no way of knowing if that was true. As they prepared to leave, Martinez approached once more. "A word of advice, senor," he said quietly. "That woman belongs to Sebastian Reyes. He will want her back." "I paid for her," Mason replied coldly. Martinez smiled without humor. "What you bought was time, nothing more. Reyes always reclaims what he considers his." Mason mounted behind the unconscious woman, pulling Elena up to sit before him. As they rode away, he felt eyes burning into his back and a creeping certainty that he had just stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple slave auction. Back in town, Mason carried the woman to his hotel room, ignoring the scandalized look from the proprietor. He laid her on the bed and sent Elena to fetch Dr. Hernandez. While he waited, Mason examined the silver pendant more closely. There was no mistake, it was half of the medallion he'd given Rebecca. The other half should have been buried in the ashes of their home along with his wife and child. The woman stirred, moaning softly. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. In the harsh light filtering through the window, Mason could see she was younger than he'd first thought, mid to late 20s perhaps. Despite the dirt and bruises, there was a delicate beauty to her features, a strength that even unconsciousness couldn't erase. Dr. Hernandez arrived quickly, his expression grim as he examined his new patient. "Fever, dehydration, malnutrition," he muttered. "And these bruises, someone has not been kind." "Will she live?" Mason asked. "With proper care, yes." The doctor glanced at Elena, who hovered anxiously beside the bed. "The child is hers." "So I'm told." Hernandez knelt before Elena, speaking softly in Spanish. The girl replied hesitantly, her small hands twisting in her tattered dress. "She says they escaped from an hacienda belonging to Sebastian Reyes." Hernandez translated, his face suddenly paler. "El Brujo," she calls him, the witch. "Who is Reyes?" Mason asked. "A powerful man, dangerous." Hernandez stood, his movements suddenly hurried. "You should not have interfered with his property." "She's not property," Mason snapped. "She's a human being. To men like Reyes, there is no difference." The doctor handed Mason several packets. "Medicine for the fever. Keep her cool. Make her drink when she wakes." He hesitated at the door. "Find somewhere else to stay tonight. This hotel is too public." After the doctor left, Mason sat heavily in the room's only chair, his leg throbbing in time with his pulse. Elena had climbed onto the bed and now lay curled against her mother's side, her small body tense with worry. "What's your mother's name?" Mason asked gently. "Sophia," Elena replied. "Sophia Vega." Sophia Vega. The name meant nothing to him. And yet she wore half of Rebecca's pendant. It couldn't be coincidence. "Elena," he said carefully, "that necklace your mother wears. Do you know where she got it?" The child's eyes widened slightly. "From La Mujer del Fuego," she whispered. "The Fire Lady." Mason's heart stuttered. The Fire Lady. It couldn't be. "What Fire Lady?" he pressed. But Elena had withdrawn into herself, burying her face against her mother's side. Mason didn't have the heart to push further. A sharp knock at the door jolted him from his thoughts. His hand went to his revolver as he approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" he called. "Sheriff Davis," came the reply. "Up, Garrett." Mason's mind raced. Had the sheriff come about the woman, about his unauthorized purchase at an illegal slave auction? Or was it something else entirely? He opened the door a crack, keeping his body positioned to block the view of the bed. Sheriff Davis stood in the hallway, his expression unreadable. "Got a report about a Mexican woman," he said without preamble. "Stolen property, they're saying." "I didn't steal anything," Mason replied evenly. "Paid fair and square." "You know that's not legal, Garrett." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "Hand her over. I've got men waiting to take her back where she belongs." Mason's grip tightened on the doorframe. "She's sick. Doctor's orders are to let her rest." "That's not your concern anymore." Davis placed a hand on his holstered revolver. "Don't make this difficult." Through the crack in the door, Mason caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway beyond two men waiting just out of sight. Not deputies. Hired guns most likely sent by this Reyes character. "Give me an hour," Mason said, "to get her ready for travel." The sheriff hesitated, then nodded. "1 hour, then we come in ready or not." After Davis left, Mason moved with urgent purpose. He gathered his few belongings and the medicine packets, then roused Elena. "We need to leave," he told her. "Quietly. Can you help me with your mother?" The child nodded solemnly. Getting Sophia down the back stairs was a challenge, but Mason managed it by half carrying, half dragging her limp form. In the stables behind the hotel, he paid the sleepy stable boy handsomely to look the other way, then saddled his horse. "We need a wagon," he muttered to himself. Sophia was in no condition to ride, and they couldn't all fit on one horse. The stable boy, counting his unexpected windfall, spoke up. "Old man Peters might sell his. His son left it when he moved to California." 20 minutes and most of Mason's remaining money later, they had a dilapidated wagon and a second horse to pull it. Mason arranged Sophia as comfortably as possible in the wagon bed, then lifted Elena up beside her. "Stay low," he instructed the child, "and keep this over you both." He draped a canvas tarp over the wagon's contents, concealing the fugitives beneath. Mason knew they couldn't simply ride out the main street. The sheriff would have men watching. Instead, he guided the wagon through back alleys, moving as quickly as he dared without drawing attention. Their last stop was Dr. Hernandez's office. Mason pounded on the back door until the bleary-eyed doctor appeared. "I need supplies," Mason said without preamble, "and advice on where to go." Hernandez's gaze darted past him to the covered wagon. "You're leaving town." "With a woman and child, yes. Sheriff Davis came looking, said someone reported stolen property." The doctor's expression darkened. "Reyes works fast." He disappeared inside, returning moments later with a cloth bundle. "Medicine, bandages, dried meat, and hardtack. It's all I can spare." "Where should we go?" Mason asked. "Can't head south. That's the first place they'll look." Hernandez considered for a moment. "North to Salvation Creek. Find Madre Luz. She helps people like your woman." "She's not my woman," Mason corrected automatically. The doctor gave him a knowing look. "She is now Senor, for better or worse." He pressed something into Mason's hand, a small, carved figure of a woman. "Show this to Madre Luz. Tell her Hernandez sent you." As Mason turned to leave, Hernandez caught his arm. "Be careful, my friend. Reyes is not just a cruel man. There are stories of dark powers." "I don't believe in such things," Mason replied. "Then pray you never have reason to change your mind." They slipped out of town as the sun dipped toward the horizon, taking a seldom-used trail that wound northward into the hills. Mason pushed the tired horses as hard as he dared, knowing that pursuit wouldn't be far behind. Night had fallen by the time he deemed it safe to stop. He found a sheltered canyon with a small spring, enough water for them, and the horse and rock walls that would hide their campfire from distant eyes. Mason tended to Sophia, first coaxing water between her cracked lips and bathing her feverish face with a damp cloth. She remained unconscious, but her breathing seemed stronger, less labored. Elena watched his every move with solemn eyes. When Mason offered her hardtack and dried meat, she took it hesitantly, as if expecting it to be snatched away. "It's all right," he assured her. "Eat." She nibbled at the food, never taking her eyes off her mother. Mason noticed fresh bruises on the child's thin arms and a healing cut above one eye. Whatever they had escaped from it had been brutal. "Elena," he said gently, "you're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you or your mother." The girl regarded him with eyes too old for her young face. "The bad men will come," she said simply. "They always come." Mason couldn't argue with that. Instead, he built up the fire and prepared a thin broth using some of the dried meat. Elena needed hot food, and Sophia would too, if when she woke. As the night deepened, Mason kept watch while Elena curled up beside her mother in the wagon. The child's soft breathing soon indicated sleep, but Mason remained vigilant, his revolver close at hand. His thoughts churned like storm clouds. The pendant around Sophia's neck couldn't be a coincidence. Somehow this woman was connected to Rebecca, to the night he lost everything. But how Rebecca and their newborn daughter had died in that fire. He'd been told nothing could have survived the inferno. Mason's hand strayed to his coat pocket, where he kept his own half of the medallion. He rarely looked at it anymore. The memories were too painful. But now he withdrew it, studying the broken edge in the flickering firelight. It would fit perfectly with the piece Sophia wore, two halves of a whole separated by tragedy and time. "Mama said it's special," Mason started. Elena stood beside him, her small form ghostly in the firelight. "The necklace," she clarified, pointing to his hand. "Mama said it's special. From the Fire Lady." "Who is the Fire Lady, Elena?" Mason asked carefully. The child shrugged. "A senora with yellow hair. She gave me to Mama when I was a baby." She tilted her head, studying Mason's face. "Mama keeps the necklace to remember. She promised to find the man with the other half." Mason's heart hammered against his ribs. "Where did this happen? Where did your mother meet the Fire Lady?" "At the hospital, when the burn people came." Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, as if reciting a familiar story. The fire lady was dying. She gave me to Mama and said, find him. He will protect you both. The world seemed to tilt beneath Mason. Could it be possible? Could Rebecca have survived long enough to entrust their child to someone else to this? Sofia Vega Elena, he said, his voice hoarse. How old are you? 7, she replied. Almost 8. 7 years. The timing matched. The child would have been a newborn at the time of the fire. His newborn. Mason studied Elena's face in the firelight, searching for traces of Rebecca or himself. The child's features were delicate, her eyes dark and serious. She favored her mother Rebecca more than him, his daughter. The thought staggered him. The child he had mourned for 7 years, believing her ashes mingled with Rebecca's in the ruins of their home, was alive. She had been raised by a stranger, a woman who now lay fevered and unconscious in his wagon. Mason's throat constricted with emotion. He wanted to gather Elena in his arms to tell her who he was, what they were to each other. But he held back. The child had known only one parent, Sophia. To her, Mason was a stranger, a gruff man who had purchased her mother like property. You should sleep, he told her gently. We have a long journey tomorrow. Elena nodded and returned to the wagon, curling once more beside Sophia. Mason watched her go, his heart a storm of grief, joy, and uncertainty. If Elena was his daughter, then Sophia had raised her as her own for 7 years. She had kept half of Rebecca's pendant, perhaps hoping to find him someday. And now they were fugitives together, fleeing a dangerous man for reasons Mason still didn't fully understand. He stared into the flames, seeing echoes of that long-ago fire that had destroyed his life. Now from those same ashes, a chance at redemption had emerged. A daughter he never knew. A woman who had protected that daughter when he could not. Mason didn't believe in fate or divine intervention. But as he kept watch through the long night, the broken medallion clutched in his hand, he wondered if perhaps he should start. Dawn broke with a wash of pale gold across the eastern sky. Mason, who had dozed fitfully through the latter part of the night, roused himself and checked on his charges. Elena still slept, her small body curled protectively around Sophia. The woman's condition seemed unchanged, not worse but not better either. Mason prepared a simple breakfast of coffee for himself and more hardtack soaked in water for Elena. As the child ate, he changed Sophia's bandages and coaxed more water between her lips. Will Mama wake up soon? Elena asked, watching the procedure with anxious eyes. I hope so, Mason replied honestly. The medicine will help, but she needs rest too. They set out as soon as the horses were ready, Mason pushing northward at a steady pace. He knew they were being pursued. The question wasn't if, but when their hunters would catch up. The terrain grew more rugged as they climbed into the foothills. Mason chose the most difficult trails, hoping to lose any trackers in the rocky ground. By midday, they had gained enough elevation that the desert heat had given way to a cooler pine-scented air. Mason called a brief halt in a shaded grove to rest the horses and check on Sophia. To his surprise, her fever seemed to have broken. Her skin was cooler to the touch, and her breathing more regular. She's getting better, Elena said, a note of hope in her voice. She's strong, Mason agreed, like her daughter. Elena beamed at the compliment, perhaps the first smile Mason had seen from her. The sight twisted something in his chest. This solemn child with Rebecca's smile was his daughter, his blood, and he was a stranger to her. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the wagon jolting over increasingly rough terrain. Mason kept a vigilant eye on their back trail, alert for any sign of pursuit. It was Elena who spotted the riders first. Bad men, she said simply, pointing to a dust cloud in the distance behind them. Mason squinted against the sun. 3 riders moving fast. Too far to identify, but the prickle at the back of his neck told him these weren't friendly travelers. Hold on, he told Elena, urging the horses to a faster pace. The wagon rattled dangerously over the uneven ground, each jolt threatening to break an axle or throw a wheel. Sophia was tossed about in the wagon bed, despite Mason's efforts to secure her. Elena clung to the seat beside him, her face pale but determined. The riders were gaining ground, their fresher mounts easily outpacing the tired team pulling the wagon. Mason searched desperately for an escape route, finally spotting a narrow canyon cutting into the hillside ahead. Hold tight, he instructed Elena, steering the team toward the canyon entrance. The passage was barely wide enough for the wagon, its walls rising sheer on either side. Mason hoped the confined space would force their pursuers to approach in single file, giving him a fighting chance if it came to gunplay. 100 yards into the canyon, he halted the wagon where a rockfall created a natural barrier. Mason lifted Elena down, then carried Sophia to a sheltered spot behind the largest boulders. Stay with your mother, he told Elena. Don't come out no matter what you hear. The child nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with fear but trusting. Mason positioned himself behind the wagon, revolver ready. The thundering hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls. Then they slowed, approaching more cautiously. Garrett, a voice called. We know you're in there. Sheriff Davis? So his suspicions had been correct. The lawman was in Rhea's pocket. Just want to talk, Garrett, Davis continued. No need for bloodshed. Mason remained silent, eyes fixed on the canyon entrance. The sheriff wouldn't risk riding into an ambush. He'd send someone expendable first. Sure enough, a lone rider appeared at the mouth of the canyon, not Davis, but a hired gun with a rifle balanced across his saddle. The man advanced slowly, scanning the rocky walls for danger. Mason took careful aim. He didn't want to kill if he could avoid it. Killing a man, even a hired thug, brought complications he didn't need. Instead, he fired a warning shot that struck the ground just in front of the rider's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. The man struggled to control his mount while simultaneously trying to bring his rifle to bear. Mason's second shot was more deliberate, striking the rifle and sending it spinning from the man's grasp. The horse bolted back toward the canyon entrance, carrying its cursing rider with it. "That's how it's gonna be, huh?" Davis called. "You're making a mistake, Garrett. Reyes wants his property back, and he's paying good money to get it." "The woman and child aren't property," Mason shouted back. "They're under my protection now." A harsh laugh echoed off the canyon walls. "You always did have more principle than sense, Garrett. That's why you washed out of the Pinkertons." Mason ignored the taunt, conserving his ammunition and waiting. They were at a stalemate for the moment. Davis and his men couldn't advance without exposing themselves to Mason's fire, but Mason and his charges were effectively trapped in the canyon. As the afternoon wore on, the standoff continued. Mason knew Davis was waiting for reinforcements, or perhaps for nightfall to provide cover for an assault. Either way, they couldn't stay here indefinitely. He crawled back to where Sophia and Elena huddled behind the rocks. The child was singing softly to her mother in Spanish, a haunting lullaby that echoed faintly off the stone walls. "Elena," Mason whispered, "is there another way out of this canyon? A path, maybe?" The child looked up, considering. "I saw goats," she said. "Up there." She pointed to a nearly vertical section of the canyon wall. "Goats always know the way." Mason studied the cliff face. It was steep, but not impossible. There were enough handholds for a skilled climber. But Sophia was still unconscious, and Elena was too small to make the climb alone. "Wait here," he instructed, then belly crawled back to his position by the wagon. Davis and his men had withdrawn from the canyon entrance, presumably to plan their next move. Mason used the opportunity to retrieve his rifle from the wagon, along with extra ammunition and a canteen of water. Night was falling as he returned to Sophia and Elena. The temperature dropped rapidly with the sun, and Elena shivered in her thin dress. Mason wrapped his coat around her small shoulders. "We're going to climb out," he told her, "when it's fully dark." Elena glanced at her mother, then back at Mason, with doubt in her eyes. "I'll carry her," Mason assured the child, "but you'll have to climb by yourself. Can you do that?" Elena nodded, her jaw set with determination that reminded Mason painfully of Rebecca. They waited until the night was complete, the only light coming from the stars overhead and the distant glow of Davis's campfire at the canyon entrance. Mason fashioned a crude harness from rope, securing Sophia to his back. She stirred briefly during the process but didn't wake. "Follow me exactly, Shumi," he instructed Elena. "Step where I step." The climb was grueling. Mason's wounded legs screamed in protest with every movement, and Sophia's weight threatened to pull him backward off the cliff face. Elena, to her credit, followed without complaint, her small hands finding purchase on the rough stone. Halfway up, disaster nearly struck when Mason's foothold crumbled beneath him. He slipped, catching himself just in time, but the sudden movement jolted Sophia. She moaned the first sound she'd made in hours. "Quiet," Mason whispered, though he was relieved to hear signs of consciousness. They reached the top as the moon rose, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Mason untied Sophia and laid her gently on the ground, then helped Elena over the edge. "We did it," the child whispered, a note of triumph in her voice. Mason managed a tired smile. "You were very brave." They weren't safe yet. Davis and his men would discover their escape by morning, but they had bought precious time. Mason lifted Sophia once more and set off into the moonlit wilderness, Elena trotting faithfully at his side. By dawn, they had put several miles between themselves and the canyon. Mason found a secluded hollow where a natural spring bubbled from the rocks, forming a small pool, before continuing down the mountainside. He laid Sophia on a bed of pine needles and set about making a simple camp. Elena helped gather wood for a fire, and Mason used the last of their coffee to brew a strong, bitter drink that helped combat his exhaustion. As the morning sun filtered through the pines, Sofia Vega finally opened her eyes. For a moment, she stared blankly at the pine boughs overhead. Then, with a cry of alarm, she tried to sit up, only to fall back weakly. "Mama!" Elena rushed to her side, throwing small arms around Sophia's neck. Sophia clutched her daughter, wild eyes darting around the clearing until they locked on Mason. Fear and confusion warred in her expression. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse from disuse. Where am I? Before Mason could answer, Sophia reached beneath her torn blouse and withdrew a small knife, crude but sharp. She pushed Elena behind her protectively, the knife extended toward Mason. Stay back. She warned, her voice stronger now, fueled by maternal fear. Don't come near us. Mason raised his hands, palms out. I'm not going to hurt you, he said calmly. Either of you. Mama, no. Elena tugged at Sophia's arm. He's good. He saved us from the bad place. Sophia's gaze flickered between her daughter and Mason, the knife still extended. Who are you? She repeated. Mason Garrett, he replied. I purchased you and Elena from the slave traders at Perdition's Crossing. Sophia's expression hardened. Purchased, she spat, like cattle. And now you expect gratitude, obedience? No, Mason said firmly. I expect nothing. I saw you needed help, so I helped. Men like you don't help without wanting something in return. Mason couldn't blame her suspicion. God knew what she'd endured before he found her. Mama, Elena insisted. He carried you when you were sick. He fought the bad men who followed us. He's good. Sophia lowered the knife slightly, her gaze never leaving Mason's face. Why? She asked finally. Why would you help strangers? Mason hesitated. How could he explain what he himself didn't fully understand? The pendant around Sophia's neck gleamed in the morning light, a tangible connection to his past. Slowly, carefully, he reached into his pocket and withdrew his half of the medallion. Sophia's eyes widened as she saw it, her free hand flying to her own pendant. Where did you get that? She whispered. It was my wife's, Mason replied. Rebecca's. I had it made for her as a wedding gift. Sophia stared at him, comprehension dawning in her eyes. You're him, she breathed, the one she spoke of. Rebecca spoke to you, Mason asked, his voice tight with emotion. Sophia nodded slowly. 7 years ago, after the fire. The words hung in the clearing, heavy with implication. After the fire, Rebecca had survived at least long enough to speak with Sophia. Tell me, Mason said, his voice barely audible. Please, say you. Sophia lowered the knife completely, her eyes never leaving Mason's face. I was a nurse, she began, at a small hospital near the border. As Sophia recounted her story, Mason felt the world shift beneath him once more. Rebecca, horribly burned, carried to the hospital with other victims of the fire. The baby Elena, miraculously unharmed, protected by Rebecca's body as she crawled from the burning house. Rebecca, knowing she was dying, entrusting her child to a compassionate nurse, breaking her medallion in half, keeping one piece and giving the other to Sophia with a final request. If you can find him, the man with the other half, he will protect you both. Sophia had tried it first. She had asked questions, tried to locate the mysterious husband of the dying American woman. But the border was a place of transience and violence. The trail went cold. So Sophia had kept Elena as her own, raising the child with love, keeping the broken pendant as a talisman and a promise. She never stopped looking, but life intervened, the struggle to Surrey, to provide for a child alone in a harsh world. Then came Sebastian Reyes. Sophia's voice hardened as she spoke of him. A wealthy landowner with a reputation for cruelty, he had noticed Sophia's unusual abilities, her gift for healing, her strange dreams that sometimes revealed hidden truths. He called it El Don, Sophia explained. The gift. He said I was like him, that I could be powerful if I learned to use it. Reyes had offered her a position in his household, comfortable lodging, good pay education for Elena. Desperate and alone, Sophia had accepted. But the position was a prison. Reyes used her abilities for his own ends, to read the thoughts of his enemies, to heal his loyal followers, to glimpse fragments of the future. When Sophia resisted, he used Elena as leverage, threatening the child's safety. He wanted me to teach Elena to use the gift too. Sophia said, her voice hollow. He said she had even greater potential than me, that she could see la luz, the light in people. What light? Mason asked, glancing at Elena, who had fallen asleep against her mother's side, exhausted from their ordeal. Sophia shook her head. I don't know exactly. Elena says she can see colors around people different for each person. Reyes was excited when he discovered this. Too excited. I knew then we had to escape. The escape had been harrowing, a midnight flight during a violent thunderstorm, days of hiding in the wilderness, constant fear of pursuit. They had nearly made it to the American side when Reyes's men captured them, selling them to the slave traders as punishment. And then you found us, Sophia concluded. Her eyes, dark and weary, studied Mason's face. You are Elena's father. It wasn't a question, but Mason nodded anyway. It seems so. She looks like you, Sophia said softly, around the eyes. Mason glanced at the sleeping child, trying to see himself in her delicate features. Perhaps there was something familiar in the set of her jaw, the shape of her brow. She believes I am her mother. Sophia continued. I never told her otherwise. I didn't know how. You are her mother, Mason said firmly. You raised her, protected her, loved her when I could not. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. What happens now? It was the question Mason had been asking himself since discovering the truth. What did happen now? Sophia had raised Elena for 7 years. She was the only parent the child had ever known. Yet Elena was his blood, his last connection to Rebecca. And there was Reyes to consider. The man clearly wouldn't stop hunting them. We keep moving, Mason decided. Head north to a place called Salvation Creek. There's someone there who might help us, a woman named Madre Luz. Sophia's eyes widened. Madre Luz, you know of her. Dr. Hernandez in Perdition's Crossing told me to find her. Mason frowned. You've heard of her. Stories only. They say she is a powerful curandera, a healer with gifts like mine, but stronger. Sophia hesitated. They also say she can protect people from men like Reyes. The implication hung in the air between them. Men like Reyes, men with dark powers. Mason still wasn't sure he believed in such things, but after everything he'd learned, he was no longer certain of anything. We'll rest today, he said, changing the subject. You need to regain your strength. We'll start north again tomorrow. Sophia nodded, her eyes already drooping with exhaustion. Within minutes, she had fallen asleep beside Elena, their breathing synchronized in slumber. Mason watched over them, his thoughts a tumult of emotion. His daughter returned from the dead, the woman who had raised her now under his protection. A dangerous man pursuing them for reasons Mason still didn't fully comprehend. And underlying it all, the ghost of Rebecca, her final act of love, ensuring their child's survival even as she perished. Mason hadn't prayed in years, not since the war showed him the depths of human cruelty. But as he kept vigil over Sophia and Elena, he found himself offering a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had brought them into his life. For the first time in 7 years, Mason Garrett had something to live for besides revenge and bounty money. He had a family broken and unconventional, formed in tragedy and bound by a shared enemy, but a family nonetheless. And he would protect them with his life. Dawn stretched rose-gold fingers across the eastern sky as Mason kept his vigil. Sophia and Elena slept deeply, their breathing soft and synchronized. The mountain air carried the scent of pine and distant rain, a welcome change from the desert's relentless heat. Mason's leg throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. He unwrapped the bandage, carefully wincing at the sight of inflamed flesh around the old wound. Dr. Hernandez's medicine had helped, but the infection lingered, fed by days of hard travel and little rest. It needs cleaning. Mason started at the voice. Sophia stood a few feet away, her arms wrapped around herself in the morning chill. Despite her ordeal, she moved with quiet grace, her dark eyes alert and assessing. It's fine, Mason replied, rewrapping the bandage hastily. Sophia approached, kneeling beside him with a slight frown. May I? She asked, gesturing toward his leg. After a moment's hesitation, Mason nodded. Sophia unwound the bandage again, her touch gentle but confident. She examined the wound with a professional detachment that reminded Mason of her nursing background. Infection, she declared. Deep, you need herbs. Plants I know. I can help. Later, Mason said. We should move on. Sophia shook her head. No moving. Not with this leg. It will get worse. Reyes's men won't be far behind. Then they find us, whether we run or stay. Sophia's voice was matter of fact. But if we run and your leg fails, we are caught for certain. Mason couldn't argue with her logic, though inaction chafed at him. One day, he conceded, to rest and treat the wound. Then we move on regardless. Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied with the compromise. She gently woke Elena, speaking softly in Spanish. The child rubbed sleep from her eyes, then brightened at the sight of Mason. Señor Oso, she exclaimed, using the nickname she had given him. Despite himself, Mason smiled. Good morning, little one. Sophia raised an eyebrow. Oso bear. She thinks I look like one, Mason explained, running a hand through his beard self-consciously. Sophia's lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. There is a resemblance. It was a small moment of lightness amid their dire circumstances, but it eased something in Mason's chest. Perhaps, against all odds, they could form some kind of bond, the three of them thrown together by fate and pursued by darkness. After a simple breakfast of the last of their provisions, Sophia and Elena ventured into the surrounding forest to gather plants. Mason watched them go with anxiety gnawing at his gut. What if they didn't return? What if they were captured while out of his sight? But he trusted Sophia's survival instincts. She would protect Elena. She had done so for 7 years under circumstances Mason could only imagine. While they were gone, Mason took stock of their situation. His rifle and revolver were in good condition, with ample ammunition for both. The water from the spring was clean and plentiful. Food would be the main concern. Geshern. They had finished the last of Dr. Hernandez's provisions that morning. He fashioned a crude fishing line from some spare wire and a bent pin, hoping the stream that flowed from the spring might yield trout or other small fish. The activity kept his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on darker thoughts. Sophia and Elena returned an hour later, their arms full of various plants and roots. Elena's face was flushed with excitement as she showed Mason a handful of wild berries she had gathered. "Sweet ones," she declared. "Mama says they're safe." Mason accepted the offering with suitable gravity. "Thank you, Elena. They look delicious." Sophia spread her botanical harvest on a flat rock, sorting the plants with quick practiced movements. Some she set aside for cooking, others she began to mash into a paste using a smooth stone. "For your leg," she explained, catching Mason's curious glance. "It will draw out the poison." "Where did you learn this?" he asked. "My grandmother," Sophia replied, working the paste with methodical patience. "She was curandera in our village. She taught me which plants heal, which harm. And the other things, abilities Reyes wanted." Sophia's hands stilled momentarily. "Those came later, after the war, after the fever that took my family." Her voice grew distant. "I was the only one who lived. That changes a person." Mason understood all too well. He had been changed by a loss, too hardened, isolated, driven only by the need to survive day by day. Until now. When the herbal paste was ready, Sophia instructed Mason to remove his trousers. He hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. "I am a nurse," she reminded him, a hint of impatience in her voice. "I have seen wounded men before." Reluctantly, Mason complied, stretching out his injured leg. The wound looked worse in full daylight, an angry red gash surrounded by mottled, swollen flesh. Sophia cleaned it thoroughly with water from the spring, her touch firm but gentle. Then she applied the poultice, binding it with strips of cloth torn from her already tattered skirt. "It will hurt," she warned. "The herbs pull infection out. But by tomorrow the worst will be gone." As predicted, the poultice burned like fire. Mason gritted his teeth against the pain, unwilling to show weakness. But as the day wore on, the burning sensation gradually subsided, replaced by a cool numbness that was almost pleasant. Sophia brewed a tea from some of the gathered plants, insisting Mason drink it despite its bitter taste. "For fever," she explained, "to keep your blood strong." By midday, Mason felt markedly better. The pain in his leg had receded to a dull ache, and the fog of infection that had clouded his mind began to lift. He watched as Sophia showed Elena how to clean the small fish he had caught, speaking softly in a mixture of Spanish and English. They were a striking pair, Sophia with her quiet dignity despite her ragged appearance, and Elena with her solemn eyes that occasionally sparked with childish delight. In the child's features, Mason could now see echoes of Rebecca, the shape of her mouth, the determined set of her chin, and perhaps, as Sophia had suggested, something of himself as well. "You're staring," Sophia observed, not looking up from her task. "Sorry," Mason said, embarrassed at being caught. "It's just strange to find out you have a child, a daughter." Sophia nodded, her expression softening slightly. "She is a good girl, brave, smart." She glanced at Mason. "She deserves better than the life I have given her." "You kept her safe," Mason said firmly. "You loved her. There is no better gift." Sophia's eyes met his, searching. Whatever she sought, she seemed to find it for. She nodded once before returning to her work. The day passed with surprising tranquility. Mason cleaned his weapons and repaired a tear in his coat. Sophia prepared a simple but nourishing meal from their fish and foraged plants. Elena chattered intermittently, growing more comfortable with Mason's presence. As evening approached, Sophia removed the poultice from Mason's leg. The improvement was remarkable. The angry redness had faded and the swelling had subsided significantly. "You have a gift," Mason said, genuinely impressed. "Just knowledge," Sophia replied with a shrug. "Plants have power for those who understand them. And the other powers, the ones Reyes wanted." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Those are harder to explain," she said finally. "Sometimes I see things in dreams, things that have happened or will happen. Sometimes when I touch a person who is injured or sick, I can feel their pain, know how to heal it." And Elena Reyes thought she had abilities too. Sophia glanced toward her daughter, who was playing contentedly with a collection of pine cones a short distance away. "Elena sees things I cannot," she said softly. "She calls it the light in people. Different colors, different brightness. She says it tells her who is good, who is not." "And Reyes, what color was he?" "Black," Sophia replied, her voice barely audible, "with red at the edges, like blood in water." Mason digested this information in silence. A week ago, he would have dismissed such talk as superstition. But now, after everything he had learned, he found himself more open to possibilities beyond his understanding. What does she see when she looks at me? He asked finally. Sophia's gaze lifted to his face. Blue, she said, deep in wind but with brightness at the center, like the sky with sun behind clouds. The description struck Mason as oddly accurate. He had been living under clouds of grief for so long, the brightness of his former self obscured but not extinguished. As darkness fell, they built a small, carefully shielded fire. Elena, exhausted from the day's activities, fell asleep quickly curled on a bed of pine boughs. Mason and Sophia sat across from each other, the flames casting shifting shadows across their faces. Tomorrow we continue north, Sophia asked. Mason nodded. To Salvation Creek. Hernandez said Madre Luz could help us. Against Reyes, Sophia's voice held doubt. We need allies, Mason said simply, and a safe place for Elena. Sophia's gaze drifted to her sleeping daughter. She likes you, she said softly. She has not trusted a man since Reyes betrayed us. I would never hurt her, Mason promised. Or you. I believe that, Sophia replied. But good intentions are not always enough against men like Reyes. What exactly is Reyes? Mason asked the question that had been troubling him. Hernandez called him El Brujo, a witch. Elena mentioned dark powers. Sophia tensed visibly. There are things in this world beyond ordinary understanding, she said carefully. My grandmother spoke of people who could harness hidden forces for healing or for harm. Reyes is such a person, but his power comes from darkness, from pain and blood. You believe this? I have seen it, Sophia replied, her voice hollow. I have seen him draw strength from suffering, command obedience with more than fear. His hacienda is built on graves and his wealth comes from tears as much as silver. Mason remained skeptical, but he kept his doubts to himself. Whether Reyes's power was supernatural or merely the influence of wealth and cruelty, the man was dangerous, that much was certain. How did you come to work for him? He asked instead. Sophia stared into the flames. After the hospital where I met your wife closed, I wandered with Elena, taking nursing work where I could find it moving when we had to. It was a hard life for a child. She sighed. When Elena was 5, she became ill of fever that wouldn't break. I was desperate with no money for medicine. Reyes had appeared at this lowest moment offering help with a seemingly benevolent hand. He paid for Elena's treatment at his private physician's home, provided food and clean clothing, offered Sophia employment as a nurse for his household staff. He seemed kind, Sophia said bitterly. I was blind to the darkness until we were already trapped. Gradually, Reyes had revealed his true nature and his true interest in Sophia and Elena. He recognized Sophia's healing abilities as something beyond ordinary skill and became obsessed with harnessing them. When he discovered Elena could see Aura's energies surrounding people, his obsession intensified. He believes there is power in bloodlines, Sophia explained, that abilities like mine can be inherited, strengthened through generations. He wanted to breed these traits like a rancher with prized cattle. The implication turned Mason's stomach. He wanted Elena for this. Sophia nodded, her face drawn with remembered fear. When she was older, he had plans, rituals, he called them, to enhance her gifts when she reached womanhood. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I saw what he did to others he claimed had potential. I could not let that happen to my daughter. She's not your daughter, Mason corrected automatically, then immediately regretted his words when Sophia flinched. No, she agreed quietly, but I have loved her as my own. I didn't mean, Mason began, then stopped. You are her mother in all the ways that matter, he said finally. I shouldn't have spoken otherwise. Sophia regarded him across the flames, her expression unreadable. And will you be her father now? After 7 years of absence. The question was fair, but painful. I thought she was dead, Mason said. If I had known. I understand, Sophia interrupted. I did not mean to accuse. But Elena has known only me. She has called her only me parent. This will be difficult for her. I don't want to take her from you, Mason said, realizing as he spoke that it was true. I just want to keep you both safe. After that, we'll find a way forward. Together. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Together, she repeated as if testing the word. It has been a long time since I was not alone. For me as well. The quiet admission hung between them, a fragile thread of connection amid the uncertainty of their future. As the fire burned down to embers, Mason took first watch, his rifle across his knees, and his thoughts full of the woman and child sleeping nearby, strangers just days ago now, somehow the center of his world. Morning brought a light mist that clung to the pines and dampened the forest floor, muffling sound and limiting visibility conditions that favored their need for stealth. Mason's leg felt remarkably improved. Sophia's herbal treatment had worked wonders on the infection. They broke camp efficiently, leaving minimal trace of their presence. With no wagon to slow them, they could move more quickly through the rough terrain, though they had to proceed on foot, leading the single horse Mason had kept. Elena walked between them, occasionally taking Mason's hand when the path grew steep or treacherous. Each small gesture of trust warmed something long frozen in his chest. Sophia had fashioned a crude pack from their remaining supplies, which she carried on her back. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to wilderness travel, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for resources or dangers. They stopped briefly at midday to rest and share a simple meal of wild berries and the last of the fish wrapped in leaves and saved from the previous night. Mason studied the crude map Dr. Hernandez had sketched for him, trying to gauge their progress toward Salvation Creek. "How much farther?" Sophia asked, peering over his shoulder at the map. "2 days, maybe 3, Mason replied. "Depends on the terrain ahead." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And you are sure this Madre Luz will help us?" Hernandez seemed to think so. Mason folded the map carefully. "Do you have a better suggestion?" "No," Sophia admitted, "but I have learned to be wary of promised sanctuaries." Mason understood her caution. "We'll approach carefully," he assured her. "If anything seems wrong, we'll find another way." They continued their journey through the afternoon, gradually ascending into higher, more rugged terrain. The forest thinned, giving way to rocky slopes and occasional meadows, brilliant with wildflowers. Elena's mood lightened amid the natural beauty, and she skipped ahead, pointing out colorful blooms and interesting stones. It was during one such moment, as Elena had moved slightly ahead, that Sophia spoke quietly to Mason. "She has been asking about you," she said. "Who you are, why you are helping us." Mason glanced at her sharply. "What did you tell her?" "That you are a friend, someone who knew her mother." "Her mother," Mason repeated. "You." Sophia met his gaze steadily. "For now, yes, she is not ready for more truth yet. It would confuse her, frighten her." Mason couldn't argue with that assessment. To Elena, he was still a stranger, a friendly one, perhaps, but a stranger nonetheless. To suddenly announce he was her father, that Sophia was not her birth mother, would be a shock the child didn't need amid their already precarious situation. "I understand," he said. "We'll wait for the right time." Sophia nodded, relief evident in the slight relaxation of her shoulders. "Thank you. She has lost much already. I would not take her sense of security as well." They made camp that evening in a small meadow bordered by a stream. The higher elevation brought cooler temperatures, and they built a larger fire than they had risked previously. Sophia examined Mason's leg, again applying a fresh poultice of herbs she had gathered along their route. "Much better," she pronounced. "The poison is nearly gone." Mason nodded his thanks, watching as she moved to tend to Elena, helping the child wash in the cold stream water. The domesticity of the scene struck him forcefully. This could have been his life if the fire hadn't taken Rebecca. A family's simple moments of care and connection, rather than years of solitary vengeance. After Elena was asleep, Mason and Sophia sat by the fire as had become their custom. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the black velvet of the sky. "She looks like Rebecca when she sleeps," Mason said softly, "the way her lashes rest against her cheeks." Sophia glanced at him, her expression curious. "You loved your wife very much." "She was everything to me." Mason stared into the flames. "When I lost her, I lost myself too." "What happened?" Sophia asked gently. The night of the fire, Mason had not spoken of that night to anyone in 7 years. The words felt rusty, painful as they emerged. "I was a Pinkerton detective," he began, "investigating a series of train robberies. I had a lead, an informant who claimed to know the gang's next target." His hands tightened into fist as he remembered. "I received a message to meet him that night, urgent information he wouldn't trust to anyone else." Rebecca had been uneasy about him going, especially so late. She was heavily pregnant, their first child due any day. But Mason had been ambitious, eager to solve the case that could advance his career. "I promised I'd be back before midnight," he continued, his voice hollow. "The meeting was a trap. By the time I fought my way clear and returned home, the house was engulfed in flames." The memory was seared into his mind. The roaring inferno, neighbors holding him back as he tried to charge into the blaze, his screams drowned by the crackling of timber and the crash of falling beams. "They told me no one could have survived," Mason said, "that the fire burned so hot there was nothing left to bury, just ashes." Sophia listened in silence, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I left the Pinkertons after that," Mason continued. "Drifted for a while. Took up bounty hunting because it was simple, find the guilty, bring them to justice, get paid. No attachments, no one depending on me, no one to fail." "You believe you failed your wife," Sophia observed. "I know I did." Mason's voice was firm. "If I had been home that night instead of chasing a promotion, Then perhaps you would have died too, Sophia interrupted, and Elena would be truly orphaned. Mason had never considered that perspective. The thought was unsettling that his absence, which he had cursed for 7 years as his greatest failure, might have been what allowed his daughter to survive. Your wife saved Elena, Sophia continued. She wrapped the baby in wet blankets and crawled through the flames. Her last act was one of tremendous courage and love. Tears burned behind Mason's eyes. That sounds like Rebecca. Sophia reached across the space between them, her hand coming to rest lightly on his arm. She wanted you to find us, to protect Elena. Perhaps, perhaps she forgave you even if you cannot forgive yourself. The touch was brief, withdrawn almost as quickly as it was offered, but it left a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Mason looked at Sophia with new eyes, this woman who had raised his child, who had suffered and survived, who now offered him a measure of absolution he had not known he needed. Thank you, he said simply. Sophia nodded once, then rose to check on Elena before settling down for sleep. Mason took first watch as usual, his thoughts more peaceful than they had been in years. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They set out early, following the stream that would eventually lead them to the valley where Salvation Creek lay. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, narrow paths winding along steep slopes, loose scree that threatened to send them sliding with each step. Elena tired quickly, and Mason found himself carrying her for long stretches, her small arms wrapped trustingly around his neck. The weight was unfamiliar, but not unwelcome, a physical reminder of his newfound responsibility. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, and the air grew heavy with the promise of rain. They pushed on, hoping to reach lower ground before the storm broke. The first drops were falling as they descended into a narrow canyon, the walls rising steep and smooth on either side. The path followed the stream bed, which was mostly dry, but would become dangerous quickly if rain fell heavily above them. We should find higher ground, Sophia warned, eyeing the canyon walls with concern. Mason nodded, scanning for a suitable path upward. There, he pointed to a narrow track that zigzagged up the canyon wall. That might get us above the floodline. They had just started toward it when Elena froze, clutching Sophia's hand. Bad men, she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Mason and Sophia exchanged alarmed glances. Where, little one? Sophia asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Elena pointed back the way they had come. Coming, I see their lights, dark red and black. Mason drew his revolver, straining to see or hear any sign of pursuit. The canyon was silent except for the increasing patter of raindrops and the distant rumble of thunder. She senses them, Sophia explained quietly, before they are visible. Mason didn't question the child's abilities. He had seen too many inexplicable things these past days to doubt her now. How many? He asked Elena. The girl frowned in concentration. 4? No, 5. What's his different, brighter black? Reyes, Sophia breathed, her face paling. He has come himself. The implications were clear. Their enemy was closing in, and they were trapped in a canyon with limited escape routes. The rain was falling more heavily now, the dry stream bed already beginning to glisten with moisture. Up, Mason decided, pointing to the path he had spotted. Quickly. They scrambled up the narrow track, Mason helping Elena over the steeper sections, while Sophia followed behind. The path was treacherous, loose stones sliding beneath their feet, the surface growing slick with rain. They had ascended perhaps 50 feet when a shout echoed up the canyon. Mason turned to see riders appearing at the far end. 5, as Elena had predicted. 4 were obviously hired guns, rough men with rifles and weathered faces. The 5th, riding slightly ahead, was different, a tall man in a black coat, his bearing aristocratic despite the harsh conditions. Sebastian Reyes. Even at this distance, Mason could sense the man's power, an aura of command and cold calculation that sent a chill down his spine. Reyes raised a hand, pointing directly at them, and his men urged their horses forward into the canyon. Keep climbing, Mason ordered, raising his rifle. I'll slow them down. Sophia hesitated, clearly torn between flight and staying with Mason. Go, he insisted. Get Elena to safety, I'll follow. With a reluctant nod, Sophia continued up the path, pulling Elena with her. Mason took up position behind a boulder, sighting down his rifle at the approaching riders. He fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt at the hooves of the lead horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. The men scattered, taking cover behind rocks as they recognized the threat from above. All except Reyes. The man remained in the open, staring up at Mason's position with unnerving calm. Even through the increasing rain, Mason could feel the weight of that stare, calculating, confident, utterly without fear. A rifle cracked from below, the bullet whining off rock inches from Mason's head. He ducked, then returned fire, aiming not to kill, but to keep the gunman pinned down. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, but nature intervened. A deafening crack of thunder shook the canyon, and suddenly the dry stream bed was no longer dry. A wall of water surged around the bend, gathering force and debris as it roared toward the men below. "Flash flood!" Mason shouted, though it was unlikely they could hear him over the thunder and the roar of water. The gunmen scrambled for higher ground, abandoning their horses to the flood. Reyes moved with surprising speed, reaching a ledge just as the water swept past beneath him. Mason didn't wait to see more. He turned and hurried up the path after Sophia and Elena, knowing the flood had bought them precious time but hadn't eliminated the threat. He found them huddled beneath an overhang, partially sheltered from the driving rain. Elena's eyes were wide with fear, and Sophia looked pale but determined. "The water came," Elena said as Mason approached, "just like I saw." Mason knelt beside her, pushing wet hair from his eyes. "You saw the flood coming." Elena nodded solemnly. "In my head, when the bad man looked up at us." Sophia exchanged a concerned glance with Mason. "Her visions are getting stronger," she said quietly. "More frequent." "Is that normal?" Mason asked. "Nothing about this is normal," Sophia replied, her voice strained. "But Reyes's presence seems to, amplify her abilities. It happened at the hacienda, too." The implications were disturbing. If Reyes could affect Elena from a distance, what might he do if he captured her? "We need to keep moving," Mason decided. "The flood won't hold them for long." They continued their ascent, fighting against rain and mud, the path growing increasingly treacherous. By the time they reached the canyon rim, all three were soaked through and exhausted. Before them stretched a forested plateau, the tree bending in the wind and rain. Behind them, the canyon was a roiling torrent of muddy water and debris. "Which way?" Sophia asked, raising her voice above the storm. Mason consulted the crude map, now sodden and barely legible. "North," he said, pointing. "If we can reach that ridge before nightfall, we should be able to see the valley beyond." They pushed forward into the forest, the thick canopy providing some shelter from the rain. Elena stumbled with fatigue, and Mason lifted her onto his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair for balance. The storm showed no signs of abating as daylight began to fade. They needed shelter for the night, somewhere defensible, where they could build a fire and dry their soaked clothing. Fortune favored them in the form of a hunter's cabin, abandoned but still structurally sound, nestled among the pines. Mason approached cautiously, rifle ready, but the small structure was empty of all but dust and a few pieces of broken furniture. Sophia set about creating a fire in the stone hearth, while Mason secured the perimeter, checking sight lines and potential approaches. The cabin had only one door and two small windows, which made it defensible, but also left them with limited escape routes if discovered. Elena huddled near the growing fire, her small frame shivering with cold and exhaustion. Sophia helped her out of her wet clothing, wrapping her in a threadbare blanket found in a corner of the cabin. Mason contributed his coat, still relatively dry from being protected by his oilskin slicker. As warmth returned to the child's limbs, so did her spirit. She chatted quietly with Sophia in a mixture of Spanish and English, occasionally glancing at Mason with shy curiosity. Mason busied himself repairing the cabin's single chair and table, using his knife to tighten loose joints and replace missing pegs. The simple work was soothing, a reminder of more peaceful days when he had been a man who built things rather than one who hunted other men. Sophia hung their wet clothing near the fire to dry, then set about preparing a meager meal from the few provisions they had gathered along their journey. She worked with quiet efficiency, her movements graceful despite her evident fatigue. "You should rest," Mason told her as she stirred a thin broth made from wild onions and the last of their jerky. "I'll keep watch." Sophia shook her head. "I'm not tired." It was an obvious lie. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and her shoulders drooped with exhaustion. But Mason recognized the stubborn set of her jaw and didn't argue further. After they had eaten, Elena fell asleep, quickly curled in her nest of blankets near the fire. Mason and Sophia sat at the repaired table, speaking in low voices to avoid waking her. "Will Reyes follow us in the storm?" Sophia asked, her eyes darting to the windows where rain still lashed against the glass. "If he's half as determined as you say, yes," Mason replied grimly. "But the flood will have washed away our trail. It will take time for him to pick it up again. Time enough to reach Salvation Creek. If we push hard tomorrow, perhaps." Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze distant. "I never thought he would come himself," she murmured. "He rarely leaves his hacienda." "What does that tell you?" "That he wants Elena very badly." Sophia's voice was barely audible. "More than I feared." Mason studied her face in the firelight. "There's something you haven't told me," he said. It wasn't a question. Sophia was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out her hand, hovering above Mason's injured leg without touching it. "May I?" she asked. Puzzled, Mason nodded. Sophia placed her palm gently on his leg, directly over the old wound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Mason felt a strange warmth spreading from her hands, seeping into his flesh, reaching the deep-seated pain that had been his constant companion for years. The sensation wasn't exactly pleasant. It burned and tingled as if his blood had been replaced with liquid fire. Mason gasped instinctively, trying to pull away, but Sophia's hand followed, maintaining contact. "Be still," she said, her voice strained with concentration. The burning intensified, then began to fade, replaced by a coolness that soothed the pain away entirely. When Sophia finally removed her hand, Mason's leg felt different, lighter, freer, as if a constant weight had been lifted. He stared at her in astonishment. "What did you do?" "I helped your body remember its proper shape," Sophia replied, her voice weary. "The old pattern before the wound twisted it." Mason flexed his leg experimentally. The chronic ache that had plagued him since Gettysburg was gone, replaced by a slight stiffness that felt like a recent bruise rather than a years-old wound. "This is what Reyes wants," Sophia continued. "Not just my small abilities with herbs and dreams, but this deeper healing. It comes rarely, unpredictably. I cannot command it at will." "And Elena?" Mason asked, still marveling at the change in his leg. Sophia's expression grew troubled. "Her gift is different. Stronger, perhaps. She doesn't just see auras, she can reach into them, touch the essence of a person. Reyes believes she could learn to control these energies, to shape them. For healing or harm." Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Reyes does not distinguish between the two. Power is power to him, regardless of its source or purpose." Mason absorbed this information slowly. The implications were staggering: abilities that defied rational explanation, powers that could heal or harm with a touch. If Sophia could ease a 7-year-old wound in moments, what might Elena be capable of with training and maturity? And what might Reyes do with such power if he controlled it? "We won't let him take her," Mason said firmly. "Either of you." Sophia met his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "You begin to understand why he will never stop hunting us. All the more reason to reach Salvation Creek." Mason reached across the table, his hand covering hers in a gesture of reassurance. "We'll find Madre Luz. We'll find a way to keep Elena safe." Sophia didn't pull away from his touch. "I want to believe that," she said softly. "But I have been running so long, I no longer remember what safety feels like." "Then I'll remind you," Mason promised. "Both of you." They remained like that for a long moment, connected by touch and shared purpose. Then Sophia gently withdrew her hand, rising to check on Elena before settling beside the child for sleep. Mason took first watch as usual, positioned by the window where he could observe the approach of the cabin. The rain continued to fall, drumming on the roof and washing against the glass. He tested his leg again, still amazed by the change Sophia had wrought. The chronic pain that had been his constant companion was gone, leaving only a shadow of discomfort. It was a kind of miracle, one that defied his understanding of the world. Yet he had experienced it, could not deny the evidence of his own body. If Sophia could do this, what else might be possible? What limits existed to these strange powers? And more importantly, what responsibility came with such gifts? Mason's thoughts drifted to Elena, sleeping peacefully by the fire. His daughter, born with abilities he could scarcely comprehend. A child hunted by a powerful, dangerous man who saw her as a tool rather than a person. He had failed to protect Rebecca. He would not fail Elena, or Sophia, who had safeguarded his daughter at great personal cost for 7 years. As the night deepened, Mason found himself watching Sophia's sleeping form, her features softened in repose. She was beautiful, he realized with the start. Not in the delicate golden way Rebecca had been beautiful, but with a quiet strength and dignity that transcended her circumstances. The realization brought a flicker of guilt. Rebecca had been gone 7 years, yet sometimes it felt like days. Was it disloyal to notice another woman's beauty? To feel this growing connection to Sophia? Mason pushed the thoughts away. Their situation was complicated enough without adding such considerations. Sophia was Elena's adoptive mother, his unexpected ally in a dangerous flight. Nothing more. Yet as he continued his vigil through the storm-racked night, Mason found his gaze returning to her again and again, drawn by something he was not yet ready to name. Dawn arrived with clearing skies and a freshening wind that bent the pines and scattered droplets from their needles like rain. Mason, who had dozed in the chair after Sophia took second watch, woke to the smell of pine smoke and something savory cooking. Sophia stood at the hearth, stirring a pot suspended over the fire. Her hair, dried overnight, fell in dark waves down her back, catching glints of copper in the morning light. "You found food," Mason observed, stretching muscles stiff from his awkward sleeping position. Sophia nodded. "Mushrooms growing behind the cabin. Wild garlic, too. Not much, but better than nothing." Elena was already awake, carefully folding the blankets that had served as her bed. She looked up as Mason rose, her face brightening. "Señor Oso, your leg is better." Mason smiled at her enthusiasm. Much better thanks to your mother. He tested his weight on the formerly injured limb, still marveling at the improvement. It hardly hurts at all now. Mama has magic hands, Elena declared with childish certainty. Sophia shot Mason a warning glance, clearly uncomfortable with such talk. Not magic, mijita, just knowledge of how the body works. Elena looked unconvinced but didn't argue. Mason understood Sophia's caution. In a world where such abilities were feared or coveted. Teaching a child to hide them was a necessary survival skill. After a simple but nourishing breakfast, they prepared to leave the shelter of the cabin. Their clothing, dried overnight by the fire, was stiff but serviceable. Mason checked and rechecked his weapons, keenly aware that Reyes and his men were still out there, still hunting. How far to Salvation Creek? Sophia asked as they stepped outside into the crisp morning air. Mason consulted the map one last time. If we maintain a good pace, we should reach the valley by nightfall. The settlement itself is near the creek's headwaters, according to Hernandez. They set out at a brisk walk, Mason leading the way with Sophia and Elena following close behind. The storm had washed the world clean, leaving the forest fresh and vibrant. Under different circumstances, it might have been a pleasant hike through beautiful country. But Mason remained vigilant, constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of pursuit. The storm would have slowed Reyes and his men, but not stopped them entirely. And Mason had no illusions about the man's determination or his resources. They paused briefly at midday, resting in a small clearing while sharing the last of Sophia's foraged food. Elena wandered a short distance away, captivated by a butterfly with brilliant blue wings. She seems in good spirits, Mason observed, watching the child's delight. Sophia's expression was a mixture of love and concern. She adapts quickly. It is how she has survived. She hesitated, then added softly, she asked about you again this morning, while you were still sleeping. What did she want to know? If you would stay with us, if you were family now. Sophia met his gaze directly. I told her that was something we all needed to discuss together. When we were safe. Mason nodded slowly. That was wise. She deserves the truth, but not while we're still in danger. And what is the truth, Mason Garrett? Sophia asked, her dark eyes searching his face. What happens when we reach safety? Will you take Elena as your own? Send me away, or something else entirely? The questions were fair, but Mason had no simple answers. A week ago, he had been a solitary bounty hunter, with no ties and no future beyond the next job. Now he was responsible for a daughter he hadn't known existed, and the woman who had raised her, a woman with extraordinary abilities and a dangerous enemy. I don't know exactly, he admitted, but I do know I won't separate you and Elena. She needs you, and he hesitated, then finished honestly, I find I need you too. Your strength, your wisdom, your knowledge of Elena and what she can do. Sophia studied him for a long moment, as if weighing the sincerity of his words. We will need time, she said finally, all of us, to learn how to be whatever we are becoming. Family, Mason said, the word feeling strange on his tongue after so many years alone. Different than I imagined, but family nonetheless. Sophia's expression softened slightly. Perhaps, if we survive what comes. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the terrain gradually descending as they approached the valley. Elena tired as the day wore on, and Mason carried her on his shoulders for long stretches, her small hands resting lightly on his head for balance. It was during one such period, as they navigated a particularly steep section of trail, that Elena suddenly stiffened. Bad man, she whispered, her fingers tightening in Mason's hair. Coming? Mason immediately stopped, lowering Elena to the ground and drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. Where? He asked, scanning the trail ahead and behind. Elena pointed upslope to a rocky outcropping that overlooked their position. There, one only, not Reyes, a looker. A scout, Sophia translated, pulling Elena close to her side. Mason nodded his understanding. Reyes had sent men ahead to locate them, while he followed with the main force. It was a standard tactic, one Mason himself had used when tracking particularly elusive quarry. Stay here, he instructed. Keep low and quiet. Moving with careful stealth, Mason worked his way up the slope, using trees and boulders for cover. Years of hunting men had taught him to move silently, to approach from unexpected angles. He caught sight of the scout, a lean Mexican with a battered cavalry hat and a spyglass, scanning the trail below. The man was armed with a rifle and revolver, but seemed unaware of Mason's approach. His attention focused on the path they had been following. Mason could have shot him easily from his position. One bullet and their immediate threat would be eliminated, but gunfire would echo across the valley, potentially alerting Reyes to their location more precisely than the scout could. Instead, Mason crept closer, drawing his knife. The scout sensed movement, too late, turning just as Mason struck. The blow caught him across the temple with the knife's hilt, sending him crumpling to the ground, unconscious rather than dead. Mason quickly bound and gagged the man, dragging him into a dense thicket where he wouldn't be easily spotted. The scout would eventually free himself or be found by his companions, but by then, Mason hoped they would be safely in Salvation Creek. He returned to Sophia and Elena, who waited anxiously where he had left them. "Taken care of," he reported, "but we need to move quickly. He won't be the only one searching." They set a faster pace, pushing themselves despite growing fatigue. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, they finally crested a ridge and beheld the valley of Salvation Creek spread before them. It was a sight to steal the breath, a verdant expanse nestled between towering mountains, with a silver ribbon of water winding through its center. Watered among the trees were small cabins and cultivated fields, smoke rising from chimneys in the clear evening air. "It's beautiful," Sophia murmured, her eyes wide with wonder. "And hidden," Mason noted. "You'd never find it unless you knew where to look." They began their descent into the valley, renewed hope lending energy to their tired limbs. Elena skipped ahead, her earlier fear forgotten in the excitement of reaching their destination. As they approached the first outlying cabin, Mason felt a strange tension in the air. Not danger exactly, but a heightened awareness, as if the very atmosphere was charged with expectation. "Something's different here," Sophia said softly, clearly sensing it too. "The air feels alive." Before Mason could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees ahead, an elderly woman with silver-streaked black hair and piercing dark eyes. She wore a simple dress of undyed wool and carried a gnarled walking stick, though she moved with the fluid grace of someone half her age. "You have come at last," she said, her voice accented but clear. "I have been waiting for you, Mason Garrett, and for you, Sophia Vega, and especially for you, little one." She smiled at Elena, who stared back with wide-eyed fascination. "You're Madre Luz," Mason said. It wasn't a question. The woman inclined her head in acknowledgement. "I am, and you are late. The darkness follows close behind you." "Reyes," Sophia breathed, glancing fearfully over her shoulder. "Yes," Madre Luz confirmed. "Sebastian Reyes rides toward this valley even now with hatred in his heart and blood on his hands." She gestured for them to follow her. "Come, we have little time to prepare." "Prepare for what?" Mason asked, falling into step beside her. Madre Luz's expression was grave. "For the battle that has been coming since before any of you were born. A battle between light and darkness, between those who heal and those who harm." She glanced at Elena, who walked between Sophia and Mason, holding both their hands. "A battle for the future of gifts too long misunderstood and misused." As they followed Madre Luz deeper into the valley, Mason exchanged a glance with Sophia over Elena's head. Her eyes reflected his own uncertainty and uncertainty about what lay ahead, hope that they had finally found sanctuary and answers. But one thing was clear, their journey was far from over. It had in many ways only just begun. Salvation Creek was unlike any settlement Mason had encountered in his years of wandering. The cabins were simple but well-built, nestled among the trees as if they had grown there naturally. Gardens flourished around each dwelling, filled with plants both familiar and strange. Most striking was the absence of fences or barriers. The entire community seemed to flow together, defined by harmony rather than boundaries. Madre Luz led them to a cabin larger than the others, positioned beside a small waterfall where the creek tumbled over moss-covered stones. Inside, the air was fragrant with herbs hanging from the rafters and glowing with amber light from numerous beeswax candles. "Sit," she instructed, gesturing to a rough-hewn table surrounded by benches. "You must be hungry." As if on cue, a young woman appeared from a back room, carrying a tray laden with bread, cheese, and a steaming pot of stew. Elena's eyes widened at the sight, her small stomach growling audibly. "Eat," Madre Luz encouraged with a gentle smile. "We will talk after." They needed no further invitation. The food was simple but delicious, the stew rich with vegetables and herbs, the bread still warm from the oven. Mason realized he hadn't eaten a proper meal in days, perhaps weeks. Sophia helped Elena, cutting the bread into manageable pieces and making sure the stew wasn't too hot for the child's mouth. The domesticity of the scene struck Mason forcefully. This was what family looked like: shared meals, small acts of care, the quiet comfort of being together. It was something he had lost 7 years ago, something he had never expected to find again. Madre Luz watched them eat with knowing eyes, saying little. When they had finished, she dismissed the young woman with a nod and poured a fragrant tea into clay cups. "Now," she said, settling on a bench across from them, "we have much to discuss and little time." "How did you know we were coming?" Mason asked the question that had been nagging at him since their arrival. "I see things," Madre Luz replied simply. "Not always clearly, not always in time, but I see." Her gaze settled on Elena, who was leaning drowsily against Sophia's side. "And the child's light has been calling to me for many years." "Her light?" Sophia asked sharply. Her gift, Madre Luz clarified. It shines very brightly, too brightly for one so young to control fully. Elena blinked sleepily. I see your light, abuela, she murmured, white and gold like sunrise. Madre Luz smiled. Yes, little one. And I see yours brighter than any I have encountered in my long years. She turned to Sophia. You have done well to protect her this far. It could not have been easy. It wasn't, Sophia admitted, especially once Reyes discovered what she could do. At the mention of Reyes, the atmosphere in the cabin changed perceptibly. The candles seemed to dim and a chill swept through the warm air. Sebastian Reyes, Madre Luz said, her voice hardening. Once he was a child with gifts like your Elena, a boy who could have chosen the path of light. Instead, he embraced the darkness, feeding his power with pain and fear, rather than healing and love. You knew him, Mason asked, surprised. I tried to teach him many years ago, Madre Luz replied, regret shadowing her face. He was brought to me by his mother, who recognized his abilities and feared what they might become. She was right to fear. The old woman sighed deeply. Some souls are drawn to darkness as moths to flame. Reyes was such a soul. What exactly is he capable of? Mason needed to understand what they were facing. Madre Luz considered her words carefully. He draws power from suffering his own and others. He can influence minds, bend wills to his purpose. He can sense those with gifts similar to his own. She glanced at Sophia. That is how he found you despite your attempts to hide. And Elena, Sophia asked, her arm tightening protectively around her daughter. What does he want with her? Her potential exceeds his own, Madre Luz said gravely. She was born with the ability not just to see the light in others, but to shape it, direct it. In time, with proper guidance, she could become a powerful healer, perhaps the most powerful of her generation. Her expression darkened, but under Reyes's influence, that same ability could be turned toward harm, to drain life rather than nurture it. The implications chilled Mason to the bone. He looked at Elena, now dozing against Sophia's shoulder, her face peaceful in sleep. It was impossible to reconcile this innocent child with the power Madre Luz described. How do we stop him? He asked. Not easily, Madre Luz replied. Reyes has grown stronger over the years, feeding his power with the suffering of others. He has followers who believe his promises of sharing that power. She leaned forward, her gaze intense. But he has one weakness. His power requires darkness, fear, pain. In the presence of true light freely given, his abilities diminish. Light, Mason frowned. You mean like sunlight? No, Madre Luz smiled slightly. The inner light, the same energy Elena sees that Sophia channels when she heals. Love, compassion, selfless connection. These generate a light Reyes cannot corrupt or overcome. Mason glanced at Sophia, who was listening with rapt attention. This all sounds, he hesitated, unwilling to offend, like superstition. Madre Luz finished for him, her eyes twinkling. Perhaps it is to those who have not seen what we have seen. But you, Mason Garrett, have felt Sophia's healing touch. You have witnessed Elena's visions. Can you truly say you disbelieve she had him there? His leg, once a constant source of pain, now moved freely, thanks to Sophia's inexplicable ability. And Elena had sensed Reyes's scout before any of them had seen or heard the man. I believe something is happening that I don't understand, Mason conceded. But fighting a man like Reyes requires more than belief. It requires strategy, weapons. Those too, Madre Luz agreed. We are not defenseless here in Salvation Creek. She rose, moving to a chest in the corner of the room. From it, she withdrew a small, carved figure, similar to the one Dr. Hernandez had given Mason. Each of these connects to the others, she explained. When Reyes crosses into our valley, we will know, and we will be ready. Elena stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. Sophia stroked her hair, soothing her back into deeper slumber. The child is exhausted, Madre Luz observed. As are you both. There is a room prepared for you through that door. Rest now. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough. The room was small but comfortable, with a pallet bed large enough for the three of them. Mason hesitated at the threshold, suddenly conscious of the intimacy such arrangements implied. I can sleep out here, he offered. Sophia shook her head. We have shared worse spaces these past days, she pointed out practically, and Elena sleeps better when you are near. It was true, the child had grown accustomed to Mason's presence, often seeking him out during their rest periods. Still, Mason felt a strange nervousness as he arranged himself on one side of the pallet, leaving space for Sophia and Elena between himself and the wall. Sophia lay down with Elena curled against her, the child's breathing already deep and regular in exhausted sleep. Mason remained on his back, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling, acutely aware of Sophia's proximity. Do you believe what she said? Sophia asked softly after a few minutes of silence. About Elena's power, about Reyes. Mason considered his answer carefully. A week ago, I would have called it nonsense, he admitted. But now, he turned his head to look at her. I've seen too much to dismiss it entirely. Sophia's expression was troubled in the dim light filtering through the small window. I have always known Elena was special, she whispered. But this is beyond anything I imagined. To be hunted for her potential to face such dangers simply for being who she is. We'll protect her, Mason promised. Whatever it takes. Sophia studied his face for a long moment. Why, she asked finally, why risk your life for us, even knowing Elena is your blood? You owe us nothing. You could have walked away in perdition's crossing. The question caught Mason off guard. Why indeed his initial motivation had been the pendant, the connection to Rebecca. But somewhere along their journey it had become more a sense of responsibility, not just to the memory of his wife, but to the living child who shared his blood. And to Sophia, who had protected that child at a great personal cost. I was alone for a long time, he said finally, moving from job to town to town. No connections, no purpose beyond the next bounty. He met her gaze. With you and Elena, I feel something different, something I'd forgotten. What? Sophia's voice was barely audible. Hope, Mason said simply. Sophia's eyes glistened in the moonlight. She reached across the sleeping child between them, her hand finding his in the darkness. Her fingers were warm, calloused from work and hardship, but gentle in their touch. Gracias, she whispered, for finding us, for staying. Mason curled his fingers around hers, a silent promise in the gesture. They remained that way as sleep finally claimed them, connected by the child between them and the fragile hope of a future together. Dawn broke with a clarity peculiar to high mountain valleys, the air crystalline, the light golden and pure. Mason woke to find himself alone on the pallet, the indentations where Sophia and Elena had slept still warm. He rose quickly, a momentary panic gripping him, until he heard Elena's laughter from the main room of the cabin. The sound loosened something in his chest, a fear he hadn't realized he was carrying. Sophia and Elena sat at the table with Madre Luz, sharing a breakfast of cornmeal porridge sweetened with honey. Elena's face brightened when she saw Mason. Papa Bear, she exclaimed, using a new variation of her nickname for him. Madre Luz has honeycomb real honey with the wax still in it. Mason paused, struck by the child's casual use of Papa. It was just a playful extension of her Señor Oso nickname he knew, but hearing it sent a wave of emotion through him nonetheless. Is that so? He managed, taking a seat beside her. And do you like it? Elena nodded enthusiastically, her mouth sticky with golden sweetness. Sophia watched the exchange with an unreadable expression, her eyes moving between Mason and her daughter. We have been discussing preparations, Madre Luz said, passing Mason a bowl of porridge. The Sentinels report riders approaching from the south. Reyes moves faster than I anticipated. Mason tensed. How many? At least a dozen men, perhaps more. It was worse than Mason had feared. Reyes wasn't just coming with his usual enforcers, he had brought a small army. How many people can fight here in the settlement? He asked. We are not fighters by nature, Madre Luz replied, but we will defend our home. There are perhaps 20 adults who can handle weapons if necessary. And how many with abilities like Sophia's? 7 with significant gifts. Most are healers like Sophia. A few have other talents, sensing danger, influencing weather, communicating with animals. Madre Luz's expression was grave. But none have faced someone like Reyes before. The odds were not in their favor. Even with the element of surprise and home ground advantage, a direct confrontation seemed likely to end in bloodshed, potentially their own. There must be another way, Sophia said clearly, thinking along the same lines. A way to neutralize Reyes without endangering everyone here. Madre Luz nodded slowly. There is one possibility, she said, but it requires great risk and great trust. She explained her plan as they finished breakfast. It was audacious, dangerous, and dependent on aspects of these mysterious abilities that Mason still struggled to comprehend. But as strategies went, it had one significant advantage: it might work. Elena is key, Madre Luz concluded. Her connection to both of you and her natural gifts make this possible, but she must be willing and she must understand the danger. All eyes turned to the child, who had been listening with surprising attentiveness for one so young. The bad man wants to take my light, Elena said solemnly, to make it dark like his. Yes, little one, Madre Luz confirmed, but we believe you can help us stop him if you are brave enough. Elena straightened her small chin, lifting with determination that reminded Mason painfully of Rebecca. I am brave, she declared. Mama taught me to be brave. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She gathered Elena into a fierce embrace, whispering endearments in Spanish against her hair. Mason watched them, his throat tight with emotion. Then we prepare, Madre Luz said, rising from the table. There is much to do before Reyes arrives. The day passed in a flurry of activity. The people of Salvation Creek, a diverse mix of races and backgrounds, united by their unique abilities, worked together with practiced efficiency. Supplies were gathered, weapons-ready children and elders moved to the most defensible buildings. Mason found himself impressed by the community's organization and resilience. These were not soldiers or fighters, yet they prepared for battle with quiet determination. Most striking was the absence of panic, as if they had long known this day might come. Madre Luz assigned Mason to work with a tall, solemn man named Thomas, a former Union cavalry officer who had found his way to Salvation Creek after the war. Together, they identified defensive positions and organized the few experienced fighters into strategic groups. "You've done this before," Thomas observed as they surveyed the settlement's perimeter. "Fought, yes," Mason replied. "Defended a community, no." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "It changes the stakes," he said. "Fighting for something rather than against something." The observation resonated with Mason. For years he had fought against enemies in the war against criminals as a Pinkerton against his own grief after losing Rebecca. Now, for the first time in memory, he was fighting for something, for Elena, for Sophia, for the chance of a future together. Sophia spent the day with Madre Luz and the other healers preparing remedies and learning techniques to combine their abilities. Elena remained with them, absorbing instructions with a solemnity beyond her years. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Mason sought them out. He found Sophia alone by the creek, washing her hands in the clear water. "Where's Elena?" he asked, scanning the area with automatic vigilance. "With Madre Luz," Sophia replied, "learning what she must do when Reyes comes." She dried her hands on her skirt, her movements betraying her anxiety despite her calm expression. "Are you sure about this plan?" Mason asked, keeping his voice low, though there was no one nearby to overhear. "It places Elena at great risk." "Do you think I don't know that?" Sophia's composure cracked slightly. "She is my daughter in every way that matters. I have protected her for 7 years. To deliberately place her in Reyes's path. "We could leave," Mason suggested. "Take Elena and run find somewhere he couldn't follow." Sophia shook her head. "There is nowhere Reyes couldn't follow. Not now that he has our trail." She met Mason's gaze directly. "And these people have offered us sanctuary prepared to defend us. We cannot simply abandon them to Reyes's wrath." She was right, Mason knew. Running would only delay the inevitable confrontation, potentially at greater cost. And there was a deeper truth he was reluctant to acknowledge. Part of him wanted this final reckoning with Reyes. Wanted to end the threat permanently so they could begin to build a life without constantly looking over their shoulders. "I just wish there was a way to keep Elena out of danger entirely," he said. "As do I." Sophia's expression softened. "But she is stronger than we know, I think. Madre Luz believes her abilities are exceptional." "What does that mean exactly?" Sophia hesitated. "It is difficult to explain to someone who cannot see what we see, but..." She searched for words. "Imagine the essence of a person as light. Most people's light is contained within them, visible only to those with the gift of seeing. Some, like myself, can reach out with our light touch others to heal or help. And Elena's light is different, stronger, more flexible. She doesn't just see the light in others or share her own. She can shape it, direct it, even at her young age with no training." Sophia's voice held a mixture of pride and fear. "Madre Luz believes that with guidance, Elena could become a powerful force for healing. But in the wrong hands." "In Reyes's hands," Mason finished grimly. Sophia nodded. "That is why he hunts her so relentlessly, why he will never stop." The full weight of their situation settled on Mason's shoulders. They weren't just fighting for their lives or their freedom. They were fighting for Elena's future, for whether her extraordinary gifts would be used to heal or to harm. "Then we end it," he said with quiet determination. "Tomorrow, one way or another." Sophia stepped closer, her hand rising to touch his face with gentle fingers. "You are a good man, Mason Garrett," she said softly. "Better than you believe yourself to be." Before Mason could respond, a horn sounded from the settlement's edge, 3 short blasts followed by 1 long note. The signal they had all been dreading. "They're here," Mason said, his hand automatically moving to his revolver. "Reyes has found us." Sophia's expression hardened with resolve. "Then it is time." They hurried back to the settlement where the community was already mobilizing according to their prepared plan. Mason found Thomas directing the armed defenders to their positions. "Riders approaching from the south trail," Thomas reported. "At least 15 men heavily armed." "Reyes, a man in black on a white horse, matches the description." Mason nodded grimly. "Keep your people hidden until the signal. We need Reyes to believe he's facing minimal resistance. Thomas clasped Mason's shoulder briefly. Good luck, Garrett. We'll be ready when you need us. Mason found Elena and Madre Luz in the central building, a circular structure with a domed roof that served as the community's gathering place. Sophia was already there helping to arrange candles in a specific pattern on the wooden floor. Elena ran to Mason as he entered, wrapping her arms around his legs. Papa Bear, did you see the bad men coming? Mason knelt to her level, struck again by her use of Papa, even in this moment of danger. I did, little one, but don't worry, we're going to stop them. Elena nodded solemnly. I know. I'm going to help with my light. She glanced back at Madre Luz. Abuela showed me how. You understand what you need to do, Mason asked gently. Stay in the circle with Mama and the others. Use my light to make a shield. Don't be afraid even if the bad man says scary things. Elena recited the instructions with calm determination. Mason touched her cheek, his heart swelling with pride and fear. That's right. And remember, I'll be right outside keeping watch. Nothing will harm you while I'm here. It was a promise he wasn't certain he could keep, but he made it anyway. Elena deserved that much certainty in a world suddenly full of danger. Madre Luz approached her, expression grave. It is time, Mason Garrett. Take your position. Remember, Reyes must believe Elena is vulnerable. He must enter the circle willingly for our plan to succeed. Mason nodded, though every instinct rebelled against the idea of allowing Reyes anywhere near Elena. He looked to Sophia, who stood pale but resolute beside the arranged candles. Be careful, she said simply. You too. Mason hesitated, then added, I'll be close, whatever happens. He left the building with reluctance, taking up his position behind a stack of firewood, with a clear view of the approaching trail. His rifle lay ready beside him, though he knew bullets might prove useless against Reyes's particular powers. The riders appeared at the edge of the settlement as the last light faded from the sky. They approached slowly, warily, clearly expecting resistance. At their center rode Sebastian Reyes on a pale horse, his black coat and hat creating a stark silhouette against the darkening landscape. Even at a distance, Reyes emanated an aura of menace and power. He sat straight in the saddle, surveying the settlement with calculating eyes. When no immediate challenge presented itself, he raised a hand, signaling his men to spread out and search the buildings. Mason remained hidden, watching as Reyes's men moved through the seemingly deserted settlement. They would find the few residents who had remained in their homes, mostly elders, who could not be moved easily, but most of the community was hidden according to plan, waiting for the signal. Reyes himself dismounted before the central building, as if drawn to it by some unseen force. Perhaps he sensed the concentration of power within Sophia, Elena, Madre Luz, and the other gifted healers gathered in their protective circle. Mason tensed as Reyes approached the building's entrance. This was the most dangerous moment of their plan, allowing Reyes to believe he had found Elena undefended, luring him into the trap they had prepared. A flicker of movement caught Mason's eye, a small face peering out from the building's window. Elena watching Reyes' approach with whitish, solemn eyes. The sight nearly undid Mason's resolve. Every fiber of his being screamed to rush forward to place himself between the child and the approaching danger. But he held his position, trusting in Madre Luz's plan, in Sophia's strength, in Elena's remarkable abilities. Trusting that together they might accomplish what none of them could do alone. Reyes paused at the building's entrance, as if sensing the power gathered within. Then with a confident stride, he pushed open the door and entered. Mason counted slowly in his head, giving Reyes time to fully commit to his course. Then he moved circling around to the building's rear entrance as planned. Thomas and the other defenders would be doing the same from different directions, gradually surrounding the central building, while Reyes's men remained scattered throughout the settlement. Inside, Mason found what they had prepared, a circle of candles surrounding Sophia, Elena, Madre Luz, and 4 other healers, all seated with hands joined. Reyes stood just outside the circle, his face a mask of contemptuous amusement. Such a pitiful defense, he was saying as Mason slipped silently into the shadows at the room's edge. Did you truly believe candles and hand-holding would stop me, Sophia? Sophia's face remained impassive, though Mason could see the tension in her shoulders. We believed you would come, she replied evenly, as you have. Reyes laughed, the sound unnaturally harsh in the quiet room. Of course I came. Did you think I would abandon what is mine? His gaze shifted to Elena, who stared back at him with remarkable composure for one so young. The child has grown. Her power has grown with her. I can feel it even now pushing against me. She is not yours, Sophia said, her voice cold with controlled fury. She never was. No, Reyes raised an eyebrow. She was born with gifts like mine, gifts that deserve proper cultivation. You have kept her from her true potential, Sophia. Kept her weak and ignorant. I have kept her safe, Sophia countered. Safe from becoming what you are. Reyes' expression hardened. And what am I exactly? A man who recognizes power, who seeks to nurture it rather than fear it. He began to circle the group slowly like a predator, sizing up its prey. The old ways are dying, Sophia. The new world has no place for healers hiding in mountains tending to shepherds and farmers. Real power requires ambition, vision. It requires compassion. Madre Luz spoke for the first time, her voice strong despite her age. Something you lost long ago, Sebastian. Reyes stopped, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. Madre Luz, he said coldly. Still clinging to life, I see. Still preaching your tired philosophy of restraint and sacrifice. Still witnessing the consequences of those who reject it, she replied calmly. Reyes dismissed her with a contemptuous gesture, returning his attention to Elena. Come, child, he said, his voice suddenly gentle, persuasive. You don't belong with these frightened old women. Come with me, and I will show you what your gifts truly mean. The power you could wield, the wonders you could accomplish. Elena didn't move her small hands, gripping Sophia's and Madre Luz's tightly, but Mason could see the confusion in her eyes, the momentary uncertainty, as Reyes's words seemed to echo in the air with unnatural resonance. This was the danger Madre Luz had warned of: Reyes's ability to influence minds, to make his twisted logic seem reasonable, even appealing. Mason tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, though they had agreed he would remain hidden until the critical moment. Your light is black, Elena said suddenly, her voice clear and unafraid. Black with red edges like blood in water. It hurts to look at. Reyes's facade of benevolence cracked slightly. You see clearly, child, more clearly than your guardians. He spat the word. My power is different from theirs, yes. Stronger, unconstrained by their foolish limitations. Corrupted, Madre Luz corrected. Twisted by your choices, Sebastian. By your willingness to feed on pain rather than heal it. Reyes ignored her, focusing entirely on Elena now. I can teach you to use what you see, child. To harness it, shape it to your will. These women would have you believe your power is only for healing, for serving others. I will show you its true potential. Mason could see Elena wavering, the natural curiosity of a child battling with her instinctive wariness. This was the moment Madre Luz had prepared them for. Reyes attempting to seduce Elena with promises of power and knowledge, using his unnatural influence to weaken her resolve. Now, Elena, Sophia said quietly, remember what we practiced. Elena closed her eyes, her small face scrunching in concentration. The air in the room seemed to thicken, to vibrate with unseen energy. The candle flames stretched and brightened, casting strange shadows on the walls. Reyes's expression changed from confidence to confusion, then to the first hints of alarm. What is this? He demanded, looking around as the sensation intensified. What are you doing? Showing Elena her true potential, Madre Luz replied calmly. Not as you would teach it, but as it was meant to be. The circle of joined hands began to glow with a soft golden light that seemed to emanate from within each person rather than from any external source. It spread outward from their clasped hands, forming a luminous dome that encompassed the entire circle. Reyes took an involuntary step back, his face contorting with a mixture of rage and unexpected fear. Stop this, he commanded, his voice cracking with strain. Elena, come to me now. But Elena remained seated, her eyes still closed, her small body now suffused with the same golden light that connected the circle. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. You hurt people, she said simply. You take their light to make yours stronger. That's wrong. Reyes snarled, his refined facade crumbling completely. He reached toward Elena as if to physically drag her from the circle, but as his hand touched the dome of light, he recoiled with a cry of pain. You cannot touch her. Sophia said, her own voice resonating with newfound power. Not anymore, basically. Mason had never seen Sophia like this, her entire being transformed by the shared energy of the circle, her natural beauty illuminated from within by a radiance that seemed to reveal her true self, stripped of fear and doubt. Reyes recovered quickly, his momentary vulnerability replaced by a cold fury. Very impressive, he sneered. A pretty light show. But do you really think this will stop me? He gestured sharply, and the candles around the circle flared unnaturally high, their flames turning from gold to an ominous blue-black. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began to form on the wooden floor, creeping toward the circle of light. Mason could see the strain on the faces of the healers as they fought to maintain their connection against Reyes's counterattack. I have studied powers you cannot imagine, Reyes hissed. Learned secrets buried for centuries. Your pathetic circle cannot stand against what I have become. The frost reached the edge of the light dome where it sizzled and evaporated. But the dome itself seemed to contract slightly, the golden light dimming under the assault of Reyes's dark power. This was the moment Mason had been waiting for. Reyes fully engaged, his attention fixed on breaking the circle. Moving silently from the shadows, Mason positioned himself behind the preoccupied man, his revolver raised. "It's over, Reyes," he said, his voice cutting through the supernatural tension in the room. "Call off your attack or I put a bullet in your spine." Reyes froze, clearly surprised by Mason's presence. Then slowly he turned his head, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Mason Garrett," he said as if greeting an old friend. "The grieving husband, the failed protector." His eyes gleamed with malicious amusement. "Did you think I didn't know who you were while you helped Sophia and the child?" "Doesn't matter what you know," Mason replied, keeping his revolver steady. "Only matters that you're going to walk out of here and never come near them again." Reyes laughed to sound like breaking glass. "Or what? You'll shoot me?" He spread his arms in a mocking invitation. "Go ahead. But know this: the moment I die, the bond linking me to my men activates. They will swarm this building, kill everyone inside, including your precious daughter." Mason's finger tightened on the trigger. Could he be bluffing? Or was this another manifestation of Reyes's unnatural powers, some kind of dead man's switch that would doom them all? "He speaks truth," Madre Lou said gravely. "I can feel the connection. His death would trigger a bloodbath." Reyes's smile widened. "A standoff, then. How tedious." With shocking speed, he spun and flung his hand toward Mason, as if throwing something invisible. Mason felt it like a physical blow, a wave of cold that knocked him backward, sending his revolver clattering across the floor. He hit the wall hard, the air driven from his lungs, his body suddenly leaden and unresponsive. "Mason!" Sophia cried, half rising before Madre Luz pulled her back into the circle. "Stay connected," the old woman urged. "The circle is our only protection." Reyes advanced on Mason, who struggled to move against the invisible force pinning him to the wall. "Did you truly believe a mere gun could stop me?" Reyes asked, his voice soft with contempt. "Me who has mastered powers beyond your comprehension." Up close, Mason could see something inhuman in Reyes' eyes, a darkness that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. This was no ordinary adversary, no common criminal to be brought to justice with bullets and handcuffs. "I believed it was worth trying." Mason managed fighting for each breath against the crushing pressure on his chest. "Admirable persistence," Reyes acknowledged, "but ultimately futile, like all your efforts to protect what's mine." He glanced back at the circle where Elena watched wide-eyed, her small face pale with fear. "You see, child, this is what happens to those who stand against true power." The pressure on Mason's chest increased, making spots dance before his eyes. He was going to die here, he realized, unable to save Elena or Sophia, unable to stop Reyes from taking them. "No," Elena's voice cut through Mason's fading consciousness. "Don't hurt him. He's my papa." The declaration hung in the air, vibrating with emotion and unexpected power. Mason felt the pressure ease slightly enough to draw a ragged breath. Reyes turned, his expression caught between surprise and calculation. "Your papa," he repeated, studying Elena with new interest. "Fascinating. The bond is stronger than I realized." Mason saw the moment Reyes made the connection, the realization that Elena was not merely Sophia's adopted child, but Mason's biological daughter. Something shifted in the man's demeanor, a new anticipation that was somehow more frightening than his previous rage. "Blood calls to blood," Reyes murmured almost to himself, "the strongest conduit for power." He looked back at Manon with newfound appreciation. This changes matters considerably. Before anyone could react, Reyes moved with inhuman speed to the circle's edge. "A new proposition," he announced. "Release the child to me, and I will spare this settlement and everyone in it. Resist, and I will unleash devastation beyond your imagination." "You cannot have her," Sophia said firmly, though Mason could see the fear behind her brave facade. "Oh, but I can," Reyes replied with terrible confidence. "And I will. The only question is, how many must die first?" He gestured toward Mason, beginning with her father. The crushing pressure returned, driving Mason to his knees. He fought to remain conscious, to show no weakness before Elena, but the pain was overwhelming. "Stop it," Elena cried. "You're hurting him." "I know," Reyes said simply, "and I will continue hurting him until you come to me, Elena. It is your choice." It was the cruelest form of manipulation, using a child's love against her, forcing her to choose between her own safety and watching her father suffer. Mason tried to speak, to tell Elena to stay in the circle, but the words wouldn't come through the vice crushing his lungs. Elena looked to Sophia, tears streaming down her small face. "Mama, I have to help him," she pleaded. "The bad man is taking his light away." Sophia's expression was agonized. "Elena, no." But it was too late. Elena had already broken the circle, slipping from between Sophia and Madre Luz before they could stop her. The golden dome flickered and contracted with her departure, its power diminished. A wise decision, Reyes said, extending his hand to the child. Come, Elena, end your father's suffering. Elena walked slowly toward Reyes, her small shoulders squared with a courage that broke Mason's heart. This was exactly what they had hoped to prevent Elena sacrificing herself to save those she loved. Elena, don't, Mason gasped, still fighting against Reyes's invisible hold. Stay with Sophia. Elena stopped halfway between the circle and Reyes, her gaze moving between them. In that moment, she seemed older than her years, her face set with a determination that reminded Mason painfully of Rebecca. I know what to do, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Then, to everyone's surprise, she turned not toward Reyes or back to the circle, but to Mason. Before Reyes could react, Elena reached Mason and placed her small hands on his face. The touch was electric, a surge of warmth that instantly counteracted Reyes' cold grip. Mason felt strength flooding back into his limbs, his lungs expanding freely for the first time in minutes. What are you doing? Reyes demanded, his composure cracking. Stop that at once! But Elena ignored him. Her eyes closed in concentration as she maintained contact with Mason. I can see your light, Papa, she whispered. It's blue and bright like the scamps. Let me help it grow. Mason felt something extraordinary happening, a connection forming between himself and Elena that transcended physical touch. He could feel her presence not just against his skin, but somehow within him, her innate warmth and courage flowing into his being. With it came understanding flashes of insight into the powers Madre Luz had described. Mason could suddenly see what had previously been invisible to him, the auras surrounding each person in the room, the golden dome protecting the circle, the dark miasma emanating from Reyes. Most striking was Elena herself, surrounded by a radiance so pure and bright it almost hurt to look at directly. This was what Reyes coveted, what he had hunted across hundreds of miles, a power so natural and untainted, it made his own abilities seem like a poor imitation. Enough, Reyes snarled, extending his hand toward them. A wave of cold darkness pulsed from his fingers, aimed directly at Elena's unprotected back. Mason reacted instinctively, pulling Elena against his chest and turning to shield her with his body. He expected pain, perhaps death. Instead, he felt the darkness strike something solid between them and Reyes, a barrier of light that had materialized from nowhere. No, not from nowhere, Mason realized with sudden clarity, from within himself. Somehow, through Elena's touch, she had awakened something dormant in his own being, a capacity to generate the same protective light that Sophia and the others had created in their circle. Reyes staggered back, his face contorted with shock and rage. Impossible, he hissed. You have no gift, no training. You cannot. He's her father. Sophia said, her voice ringing with sudden understanding. Blood calls to blood. You said it yourself. She stepped from the circle, breaking its formation but carrying its light with her as she moved to Mason's side. And we are her family. The three of them stood together now, Mason, Sophia, and Elena between them, facing Reyes across a room that had become a battlefield of light and shadow. The other healers rose as well, moving to form a semicircle behind them, their combined power a tangible presence in the air. Reyes's confidence visibly faltered for the first time. He looked from face to face, calculating his options, measuring his power against their united front. This changes nothing, he declared, though his voice lacked its former certainty. My men surround this building, one word from me, and they attack. Look outside, Sebastian, Madre Luz suggested calmly. Reyes hesitated, then moved to the nearest window. What he saw there drained the remaining color from his face. Mason knew what Reyes was seeing. Thomas and the other defenders had used the distraction of Reyes's confrontation to quietly neutralize his men. The tables had turned. Reyes was now alone, surrounded, his leverage gone. It seems we have reached another standoff, Reyes said, turning back to them with forced composure. Kill me and you risk retribution from those loyal to me elsewhere. Let me go and I will simply return with greater forces. There is a third option, Madre Luz said, stepping forward. One I offered you many years ago, Sebastian. Healing. Redemption. Reyes laughed bitterly. Still clinging to that fantasy that darkness like mine can be cleansed. All darkness can be dispelled by sufficient light, Madre Luz replied, if the will exists to receive it. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Reyes' eyes, a hint of the boy he had once been before ambition and power corrupted him, a glimpse of what might have been in another life. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. And if I refuse this generosity, then you leave without Elena, without Sophia, without harming anyone here, Mason said firmly. And you don't come back. Ever. Or, Reyes raised an eyebrow, Or we find out whether your powers protect against a bullet between the eyes. Mason replied evenly. I'm willing to take that chance if you are. Elena tugged at Mason's sleeve, looking up at him with concerned eyes. No killing, Papa, she said softly. It makes his darkness as stronger. Mason was struck by the child's wisdom and compassion, even toward the man who had hunted her. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her request, while maintaining his hard stare at Reyes. Reyes seemed to come to a decision. He straightened his coat with a fluid gesture, reassuming his mask of aristocratic dignity. It seems I have underestimated the complications of this situation, he said coolly. Perhaps a strategic withdrawal is in order to reassess my approach. You're leaving empty-handed, Mason clarified, wanting no misunderstanding. And staying gone. For now, Reyes conceded with a slight incline of his head. But remember this, Mason Garrett, what you have found others will seek. The child's gift is too remarkable to remain hidden forever. His gaze shifted to Elena. We will meet again, little one. When you are older, perhaps you will make a different choice. My family will still be with me, Elena replied with simple confidence. And you will still be alone. The words struck home. Mason could see it in the brief flash of genuine emotion across Reyes's controlled features. Then the mask returned, and with a final calculating look at each of them, Reyes turned and walked from the building with measured steps. Mason followed at a distance, watchful for any last trick or attack. Outside, Thomas and the other defenders had Reyes's men disarmed and under guard. They parted silently to let Reyes pass, their faces grim with contained violence. Your weapons will be returned once you're beyond the valley, Thomas informed Reyes. Ride out and don't look back. Reyes mounted his white horse without a word, his back straight, his dignity intact despite his defeat. His men were released to join him, a ragged procession of mercenaries who had discovered their employer was not as invincible as they had believed. As they rode away into the gathering darkness, Mason felt Sophia and Elena join him, one on each side. Elena slipped her small hand into his, while Sophia stood close enough that their shoulders touched. Is it over? Sophia asked quietly. Mason watched the retreating figures until they disappeared into the night. For now, he replied honestly, he'll lick his wounds, reconsider his approach. But a man like that doesn't surrender easily. We'll be ready, Sophia said with quiet determination. Stronger, better prepared. Mason glanced down at Elena, who watched the departing riders with solemn eyes. Yes, he agreed, we will. The community gathered in the central building that night for a meal that was part celebration, part solemn acknowledgement of the danger they had faced and might face again. Mason found himself welcomed as one of them, no longer an outsider, but a defender, a protector. Elena sat between Mason and Sophia, occasionally leaning against one or the other with the easy affection of a child secure in her family's love. She had used her remarkable abilities with instinctive skill, yet remained fundamentally a normal little girl, laughing at jokes, making faces at her food, growing drowsy as the evening progressed. After the meal, as the community dispersed to their homes, Madre Luz approached them. You have decisions to make, she said, about your future, about Elena's training. Can we stay here? Sophia asked. In Salvation Creek. Madre Luz smiled warmly. You would be welcome, both of you. She included Mason in her glance. All of you, I should say. We have need of healers like yourself, Sophia, and Mason's protection would be valuable, especially if Reyes returns. And Elena, Mason asked. Her abilities will develop naturally with guidance, Madre Luz assured him. She is exceptional, yes, but she is also a child who deserves a childhood. Balance is possible. The offer was tempting, a ready-made community that understood and accepted Sophia and Elena's unusual gifts that could offer protection and purpose. But Mason hesitated, looking at Sophia. What do you think? He asked her. Is this where you want to be? Sophia considered the question thoughtfully. It would be safe, she acknowledged. Safer than most places. But, she glanced at Elena, now dozing against Mason's side. I wonder if she needs more than safety. A chance to be ordinary, sometimes not just special. Mason understood her concern. Growing up in a community of gifted healers, Elena would always be defined primarily by her abilities. There would be expectations, responsibilities beyond her years. Perhaps, Madre Luz suggested gently, you need not decide everything tonight. Stay with us through the winter. Learn what we can teach you all. When spring comes, choose your path with clearer hearts. It was a wise compromise, and Mason found himself nodding in agreement. Through the winter, he repeated, looking to Sophia for confirmation. She smiled, the expression transforming her face in the candlelight. Through the winter, she agreed, and then we decide. Together. The word hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Together. No longer alone, no longer running, but facing whatever came next, and as a unit, a family forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual protection. Later in the small cabin Madre Luz had assigned them, Mason stood at the window, watching the moonlight silver the valley. Elena slept peacefully on the pallet bed, her small face relaxed in innocent slumber. Sophia joined him at the window, her presence a quiet comfort at his side. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "About choices," Mason replied. "About paths taken and not taken." He turned to look at her. "7 years ago, I lost everything. Became someone I barely recognized, angry, bitter, alone. And now I have a daughter I never knew existed. And you." The words felt inadequate to express the transformation he had undergone in these few short days. "Whatever comes next, I'm grateful for that." Sophia's expression softened. "I spent 7 years running, never staying anywhere long enough to form connections. Always looking over my shoulder." She glanced at Elena's sleeping form. "Always afraid for her, afraid of failing her." "You never failed her," Mason said firmly. "You saved her, kept her safe until we found you," Sophia finished. "Or you found us, perhaps both." The broken chain of Rebecca's pendant had brought them together, a tangible link between past and present, between loss and renewal. Mason touched his half of the medallion, now hanging alongside Sophia's on a new chain around her neck. "Rebecca would have liked you," he said quietly. "Your courage, your devotion to Elena." Sophia's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "I hope so," she whispered. "I have tried to honor her sacrifice every day." Mason reached out, drawing Sophia gently into his arms. She came willingly, her head resting against his shoulder as they stood together in the silvery light. It wasn't passion or romance that drew them together in that moment, but something deeper: shared purpose, mutual respect, the beginnings of a bond that might in time grow into something more. "What happens now?" Sophia asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. Mason considered the question, his gaze moving from Elena to the peaceful valley outside, then back to the woman in his arms. "We heal," he said simply. "We learn. We build something new." "Together," Sophia added, echoing their earlier promise. Together, Mason agreed, the word no longer strange or frightening, but full of hope and possibility. Outside, the moon sailed serenely across the star-filled sky, casting its gentle light on the sleeping settlement. In a small cabin at the edge of Salvation Creek, three people who had been strangers days before now slept under one roof, a family not of blood or convention, but of choice and circumstance, and unexpected grace. The broken chain had been reforged stronger for having been broken, its links now binding three hearts instead of two. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Reyes or others who might covet Elena's gifts, they would face them not alone but together. And in that simple truth lay their greatest strength.